How deep can the quiet go before the mind itself becomes still? Can you feel the weight of centuries settling around you? Now at night we slow the turning world. We welcome this velvet darkness, this ancient hush I am, Nazrula, and this is the gentle lullaby of the ancient earth of the chalk hills and the slow waters. Rest your thoughts now upon the threshold of deep history. Step softly into the deep night of the Iron Age. The world outside is cloaked in the thickest black a moonless blanket, woven from heavy mist and communal sleep. Only the tiniest fractured whispers of orange light escape the roundhouse door. Embers breathe a faint ruby glow within the central hearth pit, are merely memories of flame now holding onto the heat with stubborn determination. Peat smoke hangs low and heavy, a comforting ancient perfume. Smells of dense wood smoke and damp wool, and the slow, relentless passage of time. The roof thatch is a deep, encompassing shadow, absorbing every stray sound you hear, only the rhythmic breathing of those sleeping. Near you, a profound, steady sound of shared, safe rest. Walls of interwoven hazel rods, covered in sticky daub hold. The immense cold silence of the British night at Bayfield, the rough, honest texture of the sleeping. PELT beneath you is coarse deer hide scraped clean and warmed by the living body heat. Is the simplest, most practical mattress a necessary barrier between your resting form and the cold? Packed earth floor. The floor itself is worn smooth by countless bare prehistoric feet etched deep by the endless subtle movements of a family through seasons without number. Single clay bowl rests nearby, abandoned until morning. It holds the ghost scent of yesterday's thick porridge oats, perhaps, or barley ground. Coarsely between two patient river stones, there is no concept of hurry here. Hurry is a frantic modern ailment entirely unknown to this quiet settlement. The rising sun dictates the tasks. The movement of the grazing herds demands the path, but the night. The deep, impenetrable night demands only rest, absolute, utter surrender to the encompassing dark quiet. We are nestled here on Ochre Hill. Small, proud cluster of thick timber homes protected by a simple palisade of sharpened logs and a curving ditch. Dug deep into the chalky soil, this is Britain long before the sharp steel of the legions arrived, before the straight paved roads of Rome disturbed the moss-covered stones. This life is a steadfast circle of repetition. It is not a history of magnificent kings or thunderous decisive battles. It is the profound saga of the quiet, steady hand that tills the heavy soil. The patient hand that shapes the clay into useful vessels. The tireless hand that mends the fence before the wild winter winds rise. The day was filled with such repetitive motion. The soft scraping sound of grain being winnowed from the chaff. The dull thud of the spindle whirl dropping as the fiber was drawn thin. Consistent wet slap of the potter shaping the reddish local clay. These sounds of necessary routine create the structure of time here. They're the very definition of security. Recall the feeling of the heavy cloak about your shoulders earlier at dusk. Wool is rough shorn from the small, sturdy sheep pit smells faintly of lanolin, and smoke it is a true garment of the land, providing substantial weight and undeniable warmth against the encroaching damp outside. The roundhouse, the sentry walks his slow circuit along the earthwork bank. His feet crush the frost touched grasses with a faint whispering sound, a sound almost too soft to be heard, but present nonetheless. Carries a simple spear tipped with iron forged at the settlement's edge. The metal itself is a deep muted gray, not the polished frightening sheen of Roan weaponry, but serviceable, dark, and necessary. His shadow stretches long and unstable across the frost day. Fleeting transient shape of protection. Stars above are innumerable pinpoints of diamond light. They pierce the thin ceiling of the atmosphere with startling clarity, and filtered by the smoke or lamps of a larger world. The ancients found profound comfort in those unchanging cold lights. They knew the path of the plow, the bear, the archer. The sky was their eternal map, their clock, their promise of return. Now the deep cold of the pre-dawn hours begins to settle fully. The air that filters through the small opening in the roof, designed for smoke exudes sharp and carries the scent of icy dew. The small communal fire must be nurtured carefully. Through this final deep rest, a precious thing that cannot be allowed to fail entirely for starting a new fire from friction or flint in the cold. Mooring is a work of considerable, exhausting labor, so the embers must be diligently banked, covered lightly. With ash to hold their fragile inner heat until the first gray light appears, the entire village is wrapped in this expectant stillness. The dogs are curled tight near their owners, muttering soft whimpers in their dreams of chasing silent deer. The small, rough ponies tethered within the lower enclosure stand motionless, their breathing clouding slightly in the dark. Ere everything rests, everything waits. This is the peace found in perfect knowledge of the next day's duties. There are no confusing schedules. No sudden unforeseen demands. The routine itself is the shield against chaos tomorrow. Will be the spinning, the shearing, the mending of the basket weave. Slow, repetitive chipping away at the necessity of survival. The same tasks performed by the same hands in the same quiet valley for generations beyond memory. The very rhythm of this ancient existence is the deep, slow breath of the long-forgotten pasta. Sound like water trickling over ancient stone far below the earth. Sound like the slow, steady movement of the distant ocean tide. You sink deeper now into the heavy quiet of this safe dwelling. The heat from the remaining embers permeates the damp air. Low thrumming warmth that cradles your tired limbs, the dark wood beams that support. The conical roof structure are darkened by centuries of smoke. They carry the weight of countless nights, just like this one night. Of simple rest, of slow, quiet dreaming, the village sleeps soundly, protected not by walls of stone or metal, but by the deep understanding of their place in the world, by the communal commitment to the next harvest, by the necessary boring repetition of their precious lives. Let the knowledge of their profound quietude enter your own consciousness. Now let the ancient stillness replace any lingering anxious thought. The world of noise and speed is suspended far, far above this valley here. There's only the slow, soft tick of the charcoal cooling, the slow, steady beat of your own resting heart. A single drop of condensation falls from the thatch onto the dirt floor, a tiny, wet sound swallowed instantly by the guard on the perimeter. Stops his movement for a moment, listening. To the total silence of the moonless night, he is satisfied with the quietude. He continues his slow, rhythmic patrol, the iron band of his torque resting coolly against his neck. A simple band of wealth and belonging. Knows his duty is only to listen for disturbance. But tonight there is only the peace that comes from the turning wheel. Knowledge that the sun will surely rise, bringing the necessary mundane light for the necessary mundane work. You are safely held here in the profound predictability of the Iron Age nightlight. The scent of the smoky air and the damp earth ground you. Fully let the heavy blanket of the past smooth away all friction. Sleep now deeply and without effortly. Rest tonight in the slow turning wheel of the small ordinary lives, the quiet simple lives that truly built the ancient world. We will wait here together in the deep, safe dark until the first faint gray light begins to stain the eastern sky. Rest in the waiting. Rest in the quiet repetition of the small ordinary lives. The darkness arrives without haste, a gradual deepening of the world. The heavy sky lowers itself like a great cloak of spun charcoal. It settles upon the quiet hills of ancient Britain, and unbroken stillness descends upon the dew-dampened heather. Air is thick now with the scent of wood smoke and turning earth. Close your eyes and let the weight of the old world press gently upon your brow. Imagine the deep silence that existed before all the noise before. The endless chatter of the modern age. There is only the soft rhythmic beating of the distant waves against the chalk cliffs, the deep sigh of the wind moving through the sparse groves of oak. This is the hour when the past truly sleeps, when the echoes of 3,000 years ago merge into the hush of the present moment. Allow that stillness to draw you down. Further deeper still into the quiet comfort of Histria and Nivrula. And tonight we travel back to a time of profound, slow repetition. Life etched in the unyielding mud and the comforting shape of the circle. We explore the Celtic Iron Age, not the thrilling battles or the shining gold torques, but the deep hypnotic rhythm of the village that never changed. The quiet comfort of the eternally recurring day. We settle our weary minds upon the monotony. Safe, predictable arc of existence within the earth ramparts. We look now down upon the small cluster of Roundhouse huddled together beneath the enormous star-strewn sky. Their thatched roofs appear like mushrooms growing from the ancient stone foundations, dark velvety forms absorbing the faint light. Smoke curls lazily from the central apex of each dwelling, a thin gray plume rising straight up without disturbance. It smells of burnt peat and old wool and drying grain. complex perfume of simple human survival. The fire within the settlement has mostly banked down, now reduced to a glowing heart of amber coals, a low hum of heat against the cooling twilight air. Final chores of the long day are almost complete. The last pail of thin whey has been poured into the wooden trough. The goats are restless, shifting their small weight in the corner of the stockade. Their soft breathing adds a subtle texture to the pervasive quiet. Listen closely. There is the steady rasp of an old woman finishing the grinding of the spelt, the heavy rotating stone against the worn saddle quern, a sound as old as the hills themselves. Yes, sure. Repetitive effort demanded by the most fundamental necessity to make the daily bread. From the hard kernels of the field, her hands are rough and deeply ingrained with the dust of the harvester. Movements are efficient, weary, and entirely without thought muscle. Memory guiding the rhythmic labor, the heavy granite slab moves slowly. Low grinding whisper, a continuous drone of effort. The fine meal spills slowly onto the deerskin spread beneath the quern. Pale gold crescent accumulating in the deepening shade. The scent of crushed grain is sweet and dry, a promise of nourishment. Slowly unfolding in the cool evening, she pauses, not out of exhaustion, but because the bowl is almost full. Brief respite, a momentary stretching of the spine. Then the slow, steady grinding resumes. Repetition is the point, the absolute sameness of this task every evening of every week of every year. It becomes a lullaby of necessity, the foundation upon which all their days are built. We watch the flickering shadow of a man moving inside the nearest roundhouse. The doorway is low, demanding a stooping. Reverence to the inner space, the door itself is made of thick woven hazel rods, daubed with a mix of clay and cow dung to keep the drafts out. It hangs heavy upon its leather hinges. He pushes it gently shut with the sole of his foot. The sound is a muted thud against the packed earth floor inside. The air is thick, warm, and protective. A complete contrast to the sharp chill descending outside the walls. The walls of the roundhouse are themselves deep and sturdy, constructed of closely set posts and wattle, ben. Thickly coated with the insulating mixture of earth and straw. The surface is not smooth, but richly textured etched with the fingerprints of those who applied the daub long ago. Each ridge and valley holds the deep history of its making. It feels solid and reliable, a quiet shell against the unpredictable wilderness. Look upward toward the immense cone of the roof. The thatch is metric rye straw bound tight with willow withes. Forms a perfect umbrella, shedding the incessant western rain. The roof beams above are blackened by countless years of smoke. They hold the smell of history and the faint, lingering scent of rain. Soaked fibers, a subtle mustiness mingling with the sharp tang of the peat fire. He kneels now beside the central hearth. The focus of the entire dwelling, a circle of flat river stones, defines the perimeter of the intense heat. He gently shifts a small log with a hazel stick. The disturbance releases a brief shower of orange sparks. They spiral upward towards the smoke hole. In the ceiling, tiny momentary meteors of escaping heat. The fire accepts the log with a gentle sigh of combustion. The flames are low and obedient now, flickering deep within the pile of slow-burning fuel, casting long dancing shadows that stretch and shrink across the inner wall. These shadows are the only decoration, the only moving art these people possess. They mimic the shapes of the resting family. Curve of the sleeping dog, mound of the stored baskets. Everything moves in slow, soft time. To the breathing of the fire, the man stretches out his hand toward the heat, feeling the comforting warmth soak into his cold skin. It is a connection to the deepest parts of life, the simple exchange of wood for warmth, light, and safety. He turns his attention to the bedding. It is a simple arrangement of coarsely woven wool blankets spread over deep layers of dried bracken fern. The fern is pungent and rustic, providing insulation from the damp earth. It smells faintly sweet of the summer meadows. Now long gone, he smooths the wool, preparing the communal sleeping space, a ritual of domestic quietude. Every single night, the same soft arrangement. Every morning, the rearrangement. The gentle rhythm of the domestic cycle. The children are already curled up together like small field mice. Their breathing is shallow, and even the deep sleep of those whose days are filled with relentless physical activity. Their dreams are likely simple dreams. A food of the shifting weather of the coming harvest. No complex Anxieties or hurried schedules invade this profound rest. The weight of the present moment holds them safely. The woman enters the roundhouse. Carrying the bowl of ground meal, she moves with the quiet dignity of someone performing 1,000 acts of necessary service. She does not speak communication at this hour. It is mostly through small gestures and shared silences. She places the bowl near the hearth. Its surface glows softly in the reflected firelight. The promise of tomorrow morning's flatbread. Secured, she sits now on a low stool carved from of ancient bog oak, its surface polished smooth by generations of use. She begins to comb the long strands of her thick dark hair using a small, intricately carved bone comb. The sound is a dry whisper, a soft rasping through the tanglish, slow, deliberate act of preparing away the grit and dust of the sunlit day preparing. The body for the deep surrender of the night, her eyes are fixed upon the undulating dance of the hearth fire. She watches the slow disintegration of the wood, the quiet consumption of the fuel. There is no need for hurry there. Is no clock counting down the hours. Time is measured only by the height of the sun and the depth of the shadow, and now by the decreasing glow of the embers. Her movements slow. Further, the comb rests in her lap. She listens to the night sounds that filter faintly through the thick walls, the far-off cry of a hunting owl, the sudden frantic rustle of a tiny field creature. In the undergrowth outside, the sounds of the external world are kept at bay. The roundhouse is the center of their protected universe, safe, small, and entirely complete. The man rises, moving toward the small storage niche built into the wattle wall. He retrieves a skin of a thin, home-brewed alia, cloudy, slightly bitter drink made from fermented barley. Offers a small draught to the woman and then drinks deeply himself. The warmth spreads slowly through his chest day. Small comfort, a momentary release of the day's accumulated tension. The day's worries are being washed away with this mild narcotic warmth. The simple pleasure of sustenance. He looks around the small interior space. Everything here has purpose and history. The clay pots etched with simple geometric patterns, the worn leather scabbard holding his bronze knife, the fishing nets folded neatly against the wall. Nothing is wasted, nothing is extraneous. Their possessions are few, but essential each. Object carries the weight of its making, and it's continuous. Utility, this is a life stripped down to the bone of necessity, and that necessity is strangely soothing. Constant repetition removes the need for decision or anxiety. The world is predictable. The seasons change, the grain grows, the fire must be fed. Deep certainty of this cycle allows the mind to slow its restless turning. He extinguishes the small rush lamp that hangs near the doorway. Final act of light reduction. The oil within is precious and must be conserved. The sudden shift to deeper darkness is complete. Only the glowing hearth now provides illumination, a deep orange core of heat at the center of the world. Shadows retreat further into the highest points of the conical roof. They move toward the bed of bracken and wool, settling down. Together in the familiar scent of earth and smoke and human presence, the heavy blanket is pulled up to their chins, a deep physical weight assuring them of their enclosure. The bracken rustles faintly beneath their weight, a soft sigh of organic matter. Welcoming its occupants, he listens to her steady breathing beside him, the soft sigh of the dog resting at the foot of the bed, the rhythmic breathing of the young children, a chorus of life contained within earth and woodshell. This collective breathing is the rhythm of the village, now slow, deliberate, entirely in unison. The man closes his eyes, and the image remaining on his inner vision is the slow, persistent glow of the hearth, a low, steady pulse of light against the surrounding blackness. He does not think about the chieftain or the Roman legions far away. He does not contemplate the mysteries of the cold stars above the thatch. His mind is occupied only by the warmth of the fire, the safety of the roof, the profound comfort of the unvarying pattern of his quiet existence. He knows that in a few hours the damp chill of the pre-dawn will arrive. He knows the exact moment the light will begin to filter through the smoke hole. He knows the exact tasks that the waking moment will demand. Fetch water, tend the fire, boil the grain, the perfect repetition, the endless return. This knowledge is a soft anchor holding him firmly in the deep silt of time. Let the silence deepen now. Let the smoke scent invade your own senses. Imagine the smooth coolness of The river stone beneath your hand, feel the heavy weight of the rough woven wool against your skin sink. Further into the slow, deliberate breathing of the Iron Age night. Ancient stones outside the roundhouse absorb the chill. They wait patiently for the distant sun to begin its slow climb. The hillfort itself is a silent protector. The earth ramparts rise gently toward the unseen stars. Vast protective coil of worked soil and felled timber around the small sleeping village. Everything is hushed. The wind has dropped entirely. Only the distant mournful hoot of the owl remains. It sounds like a soft horn call across the valley floor. Steady, repeated sound echoing the deep monotony of the ancient fields. The darkness presses in heavy. And velvet soft, the fire glows lower now, a deep red eye, watching over the sleeping family. The last flicker of flame has vanished. Only the radiant heat remains, a subtle, pervasive warmth that will persist until the deep middle of the night he is floating. Now, suspended in the quiet void between yesterday and tomorrow, the repetition has become a kind of hypnotic flow there. Is no resistance, there is only surrender to the necessary rhythms. The weight of time is lifted entirely. The burden of decision is gone. The simple truth of survival holds all things. Steady sleep now rest. In the perfect predictable circle of the roundhouse, wrapped in the comforting repetition of 3,000 years. A goal listen only to the slow, quiet breathing, the deep, slow inhalation, the even slower exhalation. Husts. Fire's waiting. The stones are waiting. The deep sleep of the Iron Age. Village holds you safe until the slow return of the light. The darkness gathers around you now like a mantle of deepest midnight velvet. The earth breathes low beneath the quiet floorboards of your room. Timeless stillness settles on your shoulders, easing every lingering thread of thought away. Feel the anchor of gravity, pulling softly at your limbs, holding you gently to this place of peace. Your consciousness begins to soften at the edges, releasing the rigid architecture of the day imagine. Now that you are descending slowly into a profound silence that has waited centuries for your arrival, it is the cool, deep silence found only in the oldest chambers of the world, beneath the dust and the shifting sands of memory. Are safe here, and the ancient world is ready to share its most precious secrets. Let the low hum of the universe be the only sound that resonates within your ear. Breathing becomes shallow and impossibly slow, like the turning of a great planetary wheel. Welcome to the hour of stillness. I am Nazrula, your guide to the chambers of the forgotten. We seek knowledge etched not in ink, but in the silence between the grains of sand. We travel tonight, not through books, but through atmospheres, through the ghosts of air that linger in places of immense antiquity tonight. We begin a journey through the whispered histories of the shadow. Scribes, they were the invisible keepers, the secret librarians of the Nile, whose names were deliberately struck from the official records of the pharaohs. Their task was simple and impossibly difficult. They were charged with preserving all knowledge deemed too dangerous or too beautiful for the common eye. We stand now at the threshold of their archive, hidden deep beneath the sprawling modern city of Alexandria, far below the foundations of the Bibliotheca itself. The air here is heavy and thick with the scent of dried papyrus and pulverized incense. It is an overwhelming sense of age that wraps you like a heavy linen shroud. The only light is the faint sepia glow emanating from a single brass lamp held in my hand. It casts elongated dancing shadows across walls of perfectly fitted granite blocks. These stones were quarried millennia ago, hauled from distances that defy simple human reckoning. Listen closely to the sound of nothing at all. Is a true vacuum of sound where the outside world simply ceases to exist. The air pressure feels different here, a comforting weight pressing gently on your skin. Encouraging release. You are protected within these enormous silent crypts of learning. We walk down a narrow passage that spirals ever deeper into the subterranean world. The granite is cool against my fingertips as I trail them along the rough-hewn surface. Every 10 steps, the passage flares out into a small alcove where a hooded effigy stands guard. These are not statues of gods or kings. They are merely stylized representations of silence itself. Cloaked figures with smooth obsidian faces and lowered heads, their posture suggests eternal vigilance and unending patience. We are seeking the first chamber, the storage place of the scrolls known only as the Chronicle of the Unseen. hours these texts detail the period just before the Great Flood, when time itself was observed to behave differently when the measure of a day was not yet fixed by the tyranny of the sun. The scribes believed that time was pliable, like molten glass, able to be stretched or compressed by intense concentration. We paused before a doorway fashioned entirely from deep cedar wood, darker than any forest floor. It is banded with thick iron straps secured by a single lock mechanism of incredible complexity. The mechanism requires no key, but responds only to specific harmonic frequencies generated by human breath. I lift the brass lamp higher, allowing the light to catch the intricate carvings on the cedar surface. They are not letters or hieroglyphs, but spiraling mathematical sigils that seem to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Take a deep breath now and hold it for a slow count of 3, and as you exhale, imagine releasing a single long note, pure and low, into the dense air. The sound does not travel far, but seems to vibrate instantly into the cedar wood itself. A soft thrumming begins deep inside the door, low, gentle vibration that feels like the slow beating of a colossal heart. The iron bands retract with a barely audible grinding sound. Sound so muted it feels more like a memory of sound than an actual event. The heavy cedar door swings inward on hinges oiled by the scribes long before the birth of Rome. A rush of cold, dry air escapes from the chamber. Within it is the air of preserved history dust. Motes suspended in the beam of the lamp litter like distant microscopic galaxies. The room inside is vast, perhaps 50 paces across the line from floor to ceiling, with shelves of dark, polished sycamore wood. These shelves hold thousands upon thousands of papyrus scrolls, each carefully wrapped in linen that has turned pale gold with age. The atmosphere here is utterly pristine, untouched by the humid breath of the upper world. Imagine walking slowly among these towering columns of silent knowledge. The floor beneath your feet is polished marble, the color of deep river mud in the very center of the chamber. Resting upon a pedestal of carved serpentinite is the item we seek first. It is not a scroll, but a navigational instrument. The shadow scribes did not navigate by sea or desert alone. They sought to navigate through the layers of deep time. This instrument is known simply as the obsidian compass. It is a perfect disc of polished black stone, roughly the size of a man's outstretched hand. It holds no magnetic needle. Instead, its surface is etched with delicate silver lines, forming constellations that no modern astronomer could possibly recognize. These are the star maps of an earlier sky before the Earth settled into its current orbit. Silver lines sometimes appear dull and sometimes suddenly blaze with an internal cool fire when the light catches them. Just so as I approach the pedestal, the air around the compass shimmers. Vibration that is both physical and psychic flows outward from the obsidian disc. It feels like the echo of incredibly fast rotation in a spinning that stopped abruptly. 3,000 years ago, I reach out my hand slowly, gently, not to touch it, but merely to acknowledge its presence. Compass seems to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm. One of the scribes' traditions states that the obsidian compass does not point north. It points invariably toward the nearest location where profound knowledge is actively being lost. It is a monument to intellectual erosion. I lean closer to examine the intricate etching at the rim of the disc. There's a single glyph there, slightly larger than the others. It is an elegant symbol that looks like a single teardrop suspended above a crescent moon. The glyph is ancient, older than the language of the Old Kingdom. We believe it represents a concept that is difficult to translate into modern thought. It is the concept of unmaking time, the ability to reverse the flow, not to change history, but merely to observe what might have been as. I focus on the obsidian surface. The sepia light of the lamp seems to be drawn into the stone. The chamber grows momentarily darker. The silver etchings begin to glow brighter, pulsing with that slow heartbeat rhythm. We are not alone in this chamber of forgotten history. The presence is not threatening. It is merely the lingering echo of the last shadow scribe who stood here centuries ago guarding the knowledge she left something behind, a silent clue intended only for those who would follow his specific path of inquiry. My eye catches a small detail on the floor near the pedestal, a single thin line of dust, unlike the surrounding fine powder, traces a perfect semicircle around a pedestal, suggesting movement. Someone or something was recently here performing a ritualistic sweeping motion, but this archive has been sealed for perhaps 1500 years. How could the dust have been disturbed? I kneel down slowly, my movements deliberate and quiet. The line of dust is not merely disturbed, it is precisely aligned and nestled exactly where the line terminates at the edge of the polished floor. Is a small object. It is not of stone or metal or papyrus. It is a small piece of dark polished wood, perhaps 3 inches long. It has been carved expertly into the shape of a miniature boat, a simple Nile ferry without mast or sail. The carving is fresh, the edges still sharp, and the wood still carries the faint aroma of cedar oil. This small token, the miniature boat, should not exist here. It is a modern construction, or at least far too new to belong in this tomb of antiquity, it suggests. A recent unwelcome visitor, or perhaps an ancient message delivered across the vast gulf of time. Scribes believe that when profound knowledge is accessed, a signal is sent to ripple across the stillness of the past eye. Turn the small boat over slowly. In my palm, etched into its smooth hull, is that same teardrop glyph, the symbol of unmaking. Time, but beneath it is an additional mark, a tiny scratch so shallow it is almost invisible. Is a simple line leading directly off the hull toward the buoy. Small directional indicator pointing forward toward an unknowable destination. It implies motion movement away from this static archive. The boat is meant to travel, but where is its journey leading? The obsidian compass pulses faster now, mirroring the rapid, unexpected beat of discovery. The light returns to the chamber, banishing the brief moment of intensified darkness. The cold air suddenly feels charged with potential energy. Stand in the heart of the library, surrounded by countless volumes of lost wisdom, yet the most critical piece of information rests outside the silence in this tiny carving of wood. Recent intrusion, a deliberate message. The line of dust on the floor confirms the movement. Was recent, precise, intentional. The last known shadow scribe sealed this chamber, knowing that the age of direct preservation was over. Knew that the knowledge must travel, that it could not simply remain cloaked in stone, and the boat confirms the necessity of movement. It is a call to follow, a sign that the wisdom has already begun its voyage into the wider world. Mystery deepens instantly, profoundly. We are no longer static historians, we are pursuers of a drifting history. I look back at the obsidian compass standing silent and black upon its serpentine pedestal. Silver lines are still glowing faintly, showing constellations that once were. The knowledge has been displaced. Must follow the path indicated by this humble wooden craft. The scent of cedar oil is now the dominant aroma, mingling strangely with the dry dust of antiquity. Where does the river of history flow when time is unmade? The answer lies somewhere beyond this silent granite chamber, somewhere far from the protection of the great Nile. The boat points toward the unseen boundary between the desert and the sea. It points relentlessly onward toward the unknown heart of the forgotten civilization that created the scribes themselves. It suggests a journey, not just across space, but a perilous voyage through the unstable layers of history itself. We stand on the verge of movement. We are about to step out of the silence and into the uncertain current of the past. Feel the gentle pull of this drifting mystery drawing you forward. Let the quiet certainty of deep guide your understanding now. Wooden boat rests heavy in my palm, pointing toward the darkness beyond the cedar door, and in that vast pervasive darkness we hear a new sound that was not present before. Is the faint, persistent lapping of unseen water against an ancient stone quay, rhythm soft and measured. The sound of a vessel waiting for us to follow the path of the shadow scribes in their endless pursuit of the silent chronicle. The air grows cooler still as the unseen water whispers its invitation, and the boat shifts slightly in my grasp, ready to set sail across the stillness of your deepest slumber. Velvet quiet of the deep night remained unbroken. Thick insulating mantle of blackness rested heavily upon the downs. The prehistoric earth sighed under the weight of the immense stillness. Only the most necessary sounds were permitted to drift upon the airy, hushed repertoire of survival hidden within the ancient contours of the hill fort. The darkness here was profound, a total absence of definition. It swallowed the rough edges of the wattle and daub roundhouse living, them as dim rounded forms dissolving into the greater. Gluma, heavy. Dampness permeated the air, smelling of cold stone and winter peat. This was the quiet hour before the earliest stirring. The moment when the ancestral world seemed closest bound together by the cold iron embedded in the soil itself, and yet a single sound persisted, relentless and slow. Turning of the quern stone continued its patient circular journey, a steady rhythmic rasping whisper. Sound of friction meeting grain. It was not loud, only constant, gentle, grinding assurance that the routine held firmer ritual repeated countless times since the planting season ended. Miller, perhaps an elder or a wakeful youth, kept the rhythm true, pushing the upper stone forward, then back, then forward. A hypnotic repetition etching itself into the bones of the night. This was the deep, steady heartbeat of the Iron Age village, the monotonous preparation for the coming day's simple requirement bread. And subsistence born from the friction of two worn stones, the sound traveled softly through the thick earthen walls, seeping into the dreams of the sleeping settlemente. Comfortingly tedious sound, a lullaby of labor within the closest hut. The air was thick and warm-laden, with the rich aroma of slow-burning peat. The fire at the central hearth had banked low. A single cluster of deep amber coals provided the only visible light, a pulsing glow that painted slow shifting shapes upon the inner surfaces. Internal posts supporting the thatched roofs stood like silent sentinels, their surfaces smoothed by generations of passing hands. The rough spun wool blankets felt heavy and secure cloaking the sleeping figures against the pervasive chill. Even their deep slumber was attuned to the sounds outside, a low collective awareness of the animals. Nearby, the slow chewing of the tethered cow, the shifting weight of the few prized swine rooting softly in their pen. Every creature contributing to the low-frequency hum of life, a deep resonant sound that spoke of enclosure and safety. The smoke rising from the conical roof vent was sluggish, a dense blue-white coil rising reluctantly into the colder upper atmosphere. Drifted slowly over the palisade, eventually dissipating into the overarching veil of the night sky, but here closer to the earth. The scent lingered, powerful and earthy. It was the smell of home and permanence, a constant reminder of the slow-burning energy sustaining the community. Every surface inside the dwelling was known by touch, the rough, uneven floor of tamped earth, coolness of the clay storage jars holding the winter stores, the familiar weight of the digging tools leaning silently against the wall. There was nothing new here, nothing surprising, only the deeply etched familiarity of necessary possessions in this. Familiarity was the deepest form of rest, knowing that everything was in its proper place, that the ancient cycle held steady against the uncertainties of the wild world. The turning of the stone outside seemed to slow further reach. Rotation, an act of intense deliberation, a meditative movement driven by patient human muscle. This slow pace was essential to the quality of the flour too. Fast, and the grain would heat too much, losing its necessary substance. Too slow, and the morning hunger would not be met, so the pace was always meticulously measured, a perfect median between speed and necessity. Miller's breathing was audible above the grinding, a slow, even exchange of air, a person deeply engaged in the most ancient of tasks. The rhythm offered a strange assurance that time here did not rush, but merely unfolded in furling its hours with slow, steady grace. The dark shadows cast by the amber hearthlight stretched long and distorted. They danced a silent, endless, slow-motion ballet across the simple wooden furniture, and the suspended hide shapes wavered and reformed, always familiar, always vague, a constant visual confirmation of the low-burning fire. Air itself seemed thick with stored history. Every breath drawn here had been drawn by countless predecessors within these same walls, surrounded by the same cold earth. The monotony of the cask was its saving grace. The sheer repetition stripped the mind bare, leaving only the sensation of the stone and the grain eye pathway to a quiet mental stillness that bordered on trance. The Iron Age required this trance-like focus to survive the long, difficult stretches of endless routine. The slow accumulation of small daily achievements. A handful of grain today, another handful tomorrow, until The winter finally yielded to the first pale growth of spring. A small dog, perhaps sleeping near the warmth of the hearth, shifted slightly its low whine, barely audible. A soft sigh of canine dreaming was quickly absorbed back into the general stillness. Low hum of the village refusing to break its nocturnal composure. The damp straw bedding rustled softly beneath the sleepers, an organic sound complementing the synthetic rhythm of the stone. The whole settlement breathing in a single unified exhalation, waiting for the unseen moment when the deep indigo of the sky would lighten. The darkness felt heavy, a physical oppression, but it was also a shield. A perfect cloak of invisibility protecting the small world etched onto the hill from whatever nameless uncertainties lay beyond the perimeter. The cold outside was a silent presence too, pressing invisible barrier held back only by the sturdy walls and the radiating heat of the communal fire. Every stick of wood, every piece of peat was precious hits. Energy slowly relinquished into the protective atmosphere of the hut, providing the essential warmth for the fragile, sleeping bodies. The miller continued the labor, a silent dedication, a small engine of persistence turning the stone. The rough sound vibrated faintly through the solid ground up, through the soles of the feet of the sleeper closest to the wallet. Became of the body's own internal rhythm a deep, subconscious reminder that work was ongoing, that security was being actively maintained. Even in the profound night, this repetitive, slow-motion action was the true foundation of the age, not the sharp edge of the iron axe or the pointed spear, but the endurance of the back and the shoulder, the dedication to the turning, the grinding, the weaving, the stacking, all the monotonous actions that ensured one more day would dawn. Sleeping mind accepted this knowledge, willingly sinking deeper into the restorative embrace of the long hours, knowing the stone turner would not cease there. Steady, patient labor, the ancient stone itself seemed to possess memory etched with the countless rotations of millennia, had witnessed the slow evolution of grains and hands, the rise and fall of countless dark nights like this one. Its function was immutable, its surface permanently scored a deep, silent history written in the circular grooves. The subtle metallic scent of the iron tools stored nearby mingled with the peaty cold, sharp tang against the warm, organic smells. The promise of sharp edges and necessary conflict, but those tools were still and silent now there. Purpose held in suspension until the light returned. Now was the time only for rest and the quiet turning, profound repetitive silence of the deep rural core, where human existence aligned perfectly with the slow rotation of the celestial sphere, waiting in the comforting stillness for the slightest whisper of the approaching light. The air outside the hut remained thick with the cooling residue of morning mist, clinging obstinately to the damp thatch and the coarse weave of the woolen rocks. Gentle, persistent humidity permeated the enclosed space, where the breath of the sleeping had mingled with the fading incense of the night. The floor beneath the sleeping mat was packed earth, smooth and chill, where bare skin might momentarily graze at a grounding sensation of the ancient stone beneath the soil inside the roundhouse. The low amber glow of the central fire held hushed, dominion casting shifting patterns upon the inner curve of the wattle walls. These walls offered a comforting insulation, a deep quietude against the vague amorphous sounds of the waking settlement. Outside the protective ring of the palisade, the rhythmic sound of the quern stone begins its daily meditation, a low, steady grinding drone that speaks not of haste, but of enduring need. Friction of granite upon granite translates rough kernels of spelt into fine, pale sustenance, a slow, insistent rhythm of survival. It is the sound of time being carefully consumed moment by monotonous moment, day after unremarkable day, stretching backward into unwritten history fingers. Trace the dried mud of the inner wall where straw imprints remain etched. Like secret glyphs, ancient hands pressed this clay into place generations ago, leaving their silent signature of effort. The smoke hole high above draws the faint wood smoke upward, a slow helical motion against the shaft of emerging light filtering hesitantly from the outside world, the oak log settling deeper into the ash beneath them in its soft sighs. Tiny internal collapses in the structure of the burning wood, releasing brief, brilliant Arcs of ascending sparks, they vanish quickly into the conical darkness above, disappearing toward the unseen cold air that waits beyond the roofline. The smell of that wood smoke is the very scent of belonging. Here it clings to hair, to clothes, to the velvet linings of the nostrils, a constant subtle reminder of the hearth's necessity, the deep primal comfort of controlled heat. The consciousness settles into the familiar monotony of this existence where every task is a repetition of 1,000 earlier tasks performed by those who came before. There is a profound slowness that governs every movement, every thought, every slow inhale of the moisture-laden air outside. A dog barks once, then stops its brief sound, swallowed instantly by the vast quietude of the Iron Age morning. The sheep bells tinkle softly on the far slope, an uneven, asynchronous music, each chime a moment counted, but not measured in any hurried or panicked way. Everything here moves according to the turning of the sun and the subtle dictates of the soil. The profound slowness settles like a heavy blanket over the entire settlement. The knowledge that the routines of this life were set down long before personal memory and will continue long after breath has fled provides a strange hypnotic anchor. The rough-woven tunic of natural undyed wool feels coarse against the skin, but offers necessary warmth against the lingering chill of the stone. Age air, this fabric is the product of long hours of spinning and weaving, the slow, careful creation of necessary barrier against the endless indifference of the elements. The hands move automatically toward the bowl of stale water left from the evening before the taste is metallic cool against the dry tongue, a simple replenishment down by the edge of the enclosure. The muffled resonance of the hammer on the anvil begins its slow cadence. The smith works deliberately, shaping the dull orange iron. Each strike is spaced by long deliberate pauses for inspection and for the crucial reheating in the intense yellow glow of the small furnace. The metallic sound travels easily across the common ground, a measured punctuation in the ongoing quietude of the settlement. Hit is the sound of purposeful effort born of necessity, the creation of tools that must endure years of repetitive agricultural strain. The earth floor around the hearth is swept daily but retains the slight scent of spilled grains and dried herbs, a complex mixture of domestic odors, deeply comforting in its familiarity. A small child stirs on a sleeping pallet nearby, sighing softly, the sound of innocence wrapped deeply in the safety of the ancient round walls. The responsibility of the day ahead is not one of decision or innovation, but simply one of repeating the necessary steps: tilling, planting, gathering, fetching, grinding, forever repeating. The shadows outside begin to shorten slightly as the sun finally breaches the surrounding tree line, spilling pools of pale gold light onto the outer ring of the dwelling. This light catches the minute particles of dust dancing in the air above the fire, rendering them momentarily visible before they dissolve back into the smoky haze. Process of fetching water is a ritual of weight and distance, a slow, steady walk down the worn track to the small stream. The ancient stones that mark the path are worn smooth by countless bare feet and the repetitive drag of woven wicker baskets, rain as gathered in the smallest depressions in the rock surfaces, reflecting the muted gray sky or the sudden flash of overhead sunlight. These stones are places where the feet instinctively know where to step, even in the deep shadows of the evening or the confusing fog of the early morning. The earth itself beneath the track is a living record, a compacted chronicle of ordinary events stretching back beyond the eldest living soul. It holds the imprint of every footfall, every dropped tool, every spilled vessel, every single repetition of this simple journey. The water in the stream is clear and cold, rushing quietly over the small pebbles, a sound of cleansing and persistent movement. The clay vessel dipped into the flow fills slowly its capacity, defined by the strength of the bearer, the weight of necessity carrying. The filled vessel back up the slope requires a conscious focusing of a slow measured pace to prevent the precious liquid from sloshing over the lip. This weight becomes integrated into the musculature, a daily burden accepted without question. Because life cannot exist without the stream's constant gift. The sounds of the outer fields are now beginning to rise slightly. The distant lowing of a cow, the call of a shepherd coordinating the movement of the herd. These sounds are organic of the rhythm of the breathing landscape, not jarring or intrusive. But woven into the slow movement of the hours, the sky above the enclosure is a vast expanse of pale blue, occasionally traversed by slow-moving clouds that cast fleeting shadows across the open meadows, the shadow of the large oak tree near the entrance. Gate stretches and contracts, slowly measuring the patient movement of the morning toward the midday. High point inside the hut, the routine shifts toward the preparation of the midday. Meal simple, robust food, born of the earth and the skill of careful. Hands the crackling of fat rendered over the fire, the mild scent of roasting root vegetables mingling with the pervasive wood smoke. The movements required are precise, economical, inherited from endless preceding generations who cooked over the same kind of hearth in the same kind of space. There is no waste, no hurried action, only the deliberate, methodical fulfillment of an immediate need. The very atmosphere is heavy with the weight of time, the accumulated hours of slow, methodical life lived within. These boundaries, the thatched roof above is thick and insulating a barrier against the sharp edges of the winter winds or the torrential downpours of the autumn season. The dry reeds rustle faintly when a slightly stronger gust of air passes over them, a whisper of the wild outside the safety of a settlement. The rough spindle whirl begins its turning, drawing out the thin thread of wool, patiently adding length to the growing ball of yarn. This task requires little conscious thought only. The steady movement of the fingers, the hypnotic repetition of the twisting and pulling it, is an activity that perfectly matches the pace, slow, endless, necessary meditation in motion. The light that now fills the hut is richer, warmer than the tentative light of the dawn, a deep amber reflection from the packed earth floor. The quiet hum of the settlement is a chorus of soft sounds, the scraping of wood on wood, the rhythmic pounding of a mortar and pestle, the low murmur of voices. Exchanging brief, necessary information. Conversation here is rarely frivolous or fast-paced. It is measured like the grinding of the quern stone reserved for essential communication and slow storytelling at night. The stones used to anchor the doorframe are immense pieces of ancient local granite brought from the nearby outcrop with great communal effort. They feel cold to the touch, immutable fixed anchors in a world of constant slight change and organic decay. The sight of the distant hills cloaked in hazy blue mist reinforces the sense of enclosure and by the wooden palisade. The entire world beyond the known fields seems to move in an even deeper, slower time, a timeless place of forests and ancient spirits. The comfort derived from the narrowness of the known world is profound, the certainty that everything needed is within walking distance or within the reach of cooperative hands. The patterns etched into the rough pottery vessels used for storage are simple geometric designs repeated endlessly around the circumference. These patterns are not decorative flourishes, but signs of identity, markers of belonging to silent language of the tribe. Repetition reinforces the structure of this simple life, the reliable nature of the day's duties and the predictable cycle of the seasons. Heavy scent of fermenting grains from the storage pit just outside the door that waited patiently on the other side. The cold gray mist was still clinging low to the damp earth. It pressed itself against the outer skin of the roundhouse. Walls a silent weight of water and ancient breath. The world beyond the defensive palisade remained a muffled monochrome shadow stretching toward the invisible rim of the valley floor inside. The curved dome of woven hazel and packed mud. The night had reached its deepest chill, a profound cold that Seepnot rushed it traveled along the sleeping timbers and settled into the hollows beneath the rough woven blankets covering the family forms. Constant subtle drone defined this hour, the soft rhythmic sawing of lungs drawing in the smoke-cured air and releasing the slow steady sigh of Celtic slumber. No other sound dared intrude upon this deep communal stillness save for the faint crackle of the hearthstones adjusting to the decline of the lost embers. These stones held the residual warmth like quiet sleeping beasts radiating a barely perceptible heat that kept the worst bite of the darkness at bay. The fire was now only a memory of amber, a handful of glowing dust particles resting among the ash that had accumulated through the slow millennia of habitation generations. Of slow living had layered this space with the scent of wood smoke and damp wool. and the faint metallic tang of iron tools resting near the entrance. This was the quiet architecture of survival, the simple perfection of a cone built against the wind. And the overwhelming cold, the heavy oak door was sealed tight, braced against the unseen dangers and the predictable wetness that perpetual blanketed. This island realm, a fragile shaft of moonlight perhaps reflected from a distant cloud, managed to find the smoke hole high above, painting a single pale silver disc upon the earthen floor near the central post. Post itself was etched with the history of the house, scarred by old knife cuts and polished smooth by the constant brushing of bodies. Moving slowly through their predictable cycles, it stood as the unwavering pivot point of their small-known universe, holding the reed. Thatched canopy high above the sleeping heads. This woven roof was thick, made layers deep, designed to shed the endless rain and trap the precious heat rising from the ground. The smell of the reeds was heavy and earthy, the scent of the wetlands, where they were harvested, clinging. Even now, in the dry inner cavity of the roof, space sleep was a profound, heavy immersion. Here, a necessary retreat from the repetitive physical demands of the waking day. Slow turning of the seasons dictated everything, the relentless planting and the weary harvesting. The constant need to repair and mend and sharpen tomorrow would be exactly like yesterday, a careful iteration of routine dictated by the demands of the soil and the needs of the small herd grazing just beyond the ditches there. Were no great events planned, no unexpected arrivals, just the slow, predictable rotation of casks that ensured another day survived. Air hung heavy and quiet, the silence of deep purpose. The quiet hum that underlies any existence, truly tuned to the rhythms of the earth. A small shifting sound outside. The woven wall, perhaps a fox investigating. The midden heap, or simply the movement of the damp wind through the protective wattle. The inhabitants remained undisturbed, cloaked in the deep, unconscious shelter of their sleep, trusting the thickness of the walls and the vigilance of the gods. Of the enclosure, their dreams were likely simple, practical visions of grain silos, full or the straightness of a freshly dug ditch or the weight of a healthy newborn lamb. Mind at rest in this ancient world sought peace, not complexity, the assurance that the monotonous cycle would continue unbroken inside the roundhouse. The embers shrank further, pulling their light back into the black core of the cooling wood. The silver moonlight disk on the floor began its slow, imperceptible crawl toward the south, marking the quiet passage of the darkest hours. Every movement of this light was glacial and impossibly slow, demanding absolute patience from the watcher if anyone were awake to witness its cold journey. The cold was becoming more assertive, now touching the exposed skin of a sleeping arm, a gentle insistence reminding the sleeper that warmth must be earned with the sunrise. This chill haze of pre-dawn was the true measure of their resilience, the moment the simple structure fought hardest. Against the wild cold outside, the woven matting covering the floor provided meager insulation, but the earth itself held some memory of the day's brief warmth. The people here lived closer to the earth than any other realm, their lives intimately connected to the dampness, the cold, the soil itself. One sleeper shifted, sighing a deep breath, releasing the stale air and then settling into the dense fabric of slumber. This movement was a ripple, not a break in the heavy quiet, the slight rustle. Of course, wool against the drying straw beneath the village was a cluster of such breathing domes, a tight arrangement of shelter surrounded by the defensive ditch and the sharp points of the wooden palisade. Beyond the perimeter, the wildness waited. The endless dark woods, the peat bogs, and the silent mountains veiled always in the cold mist, but within the enclosure there was predictable structure, the knowledge that the world was ordered and safe within these simple boundaries. The repetition was the safety, the certainty that the sun would rise and the tasks would wait and the fire would need feeding. Constant turning of the grindstone, tomorrow would be the soundtrack of their morning, a slow, monotonous friction of stone against grain. The sound would travel easily across the village green, a low hypnotic drone signaling the commencement of another day, identical to the 1,000 days before it. It was the sound of sustenance, the noise of necessity, the ancient work that never truly ended, that only paused for the duration of a deep, dark night. The Iron Age was not a time of sudden change or grand sweeping narrative. It was a life measured in the slow accumulation of hours spent performing the same essential acts. Silence now was the pregnant pause before that sound began the moment of absolute rest before the muscle memory of the day. Took hold a few faint beads of dew condensation gathered on the inside of the thick thatched roof where the cold external air met the warm breathing space. These tiny drops were perfect spheres of cold water, glistening briefly in the faint ambient light before being absorbed back into the fibers of the straw. The atmosphere was dense, heavy with the weight of the coming cold and the commitment to the repetitive routine that protected them from annihilation. They were simply holding the line against the wilderness through the tedious endless application of simple organized effort. The dawn was approaching, still unseen, still hidden by the ramparts and the cold gray cloud cover, but its presence was felt a marginal lightening of the deep indigo black outside the smoke hole, a shift toward a deeper, richer slate gray hue. This subtle visual change was the only true indicator that the cycle had turned once more, that the earth was rotating inevitably toward the light. The heavy sleep would soon lighten, becoming the shallower doze of anticipation, waiting for the first official movements of the village, the cough of an elder perhaps, or the distant bleat of a nervous sheep, the sound of the thick wooden bolt being drawn back on the nearest roundhouse door. But for now, the silence held unbroken, deep and velvet, soft to the slow breathing of the ancient people. In their ancient home life, defined by the slow, inexorable turning of the wheel, the endless repetition of the simple, necessary things, this deep peace was the only luxury they knew, the absolute quiet before the day demanded its measured tribute. Of sweat and effort, the slow crawl of time within the roundhouse was the true measure of the hypnotic stability they had built against the chaotic forces of the world outside. The smell of the cold earth was rising now, mingling with the fading smoke, sent a reminder of where they came from and to where they would eventually return. Everything was preparation. Everything was maintenance. Everything was merely waiting for the next repetition of the cycle, and this profound repetition was not boring, but essential, the very definition of security in a brutal, relentless world. Chill touch of the very first light began to paint the outside of the palisade. Walls a weak pallid yellow, only just perceptible over the high curve of the defensive earthwork. The long quiet pause of the deepest night was drawing to a measured close, readying the inhabitants for the slow, inevitable return to the routine of the village grind. The silence before the grindstone begins its work, the final absolute. Rest before the necessity of the dull metallic ring of the iron axe meeting the cold dense wood. Village slept on, wrapped in the protective layers of its own monotonous certainty, the comforting hum of 1,000 previous days repeating themselves. Exactly, they rested deeply cloaked in the predictable dark, waiting for the slow gray light to call them back to the simple duties of the Celtic dawn, a process which was already underway, unseen and unstressed. The turning of the world was all they needed to trust the absolute repetition of the rising sun and the slow, sure rhythm of the boring Celtic Iron Age village life. The heat that had gathered within the central hearth did not vanish with the extinguishing of the last major flame, but merely retreated deep into the heart of the structuria, slow, smoldering, quiet core of ruby light, held captive by the Clio. Steady, soft crimson pulse against the deepening charcoal breath that warmed the low air near the packed earthen floorware. The scent of wood smoke and old wool settled heavily together, muffling the low sounds of the dwelling's occupants preparing for sleep. The smoke itself had become thin and blue, almost invisible. That had sought shelter here. They represented the true enduring permanence of the settlement, for outlasting the transient lives of those who slept above theme, a profound sense of historical depth. Sinking deep into the quiet mind, the boy dreamt now, not of great battles or soaring journeys, for those concepts did not belong to the repetitive rhythm of his life, but of the slow, steady movement of the heavy plow through the earth, rhythmic strain of the oxen, the smell of the turned soil, deep, visceral dream of enduring toil and predictable return. The velvet darkness pressing against the hide door felt vast and was stretching out over the cold fields and the sleeping woods, cloaked in the silence of immense distance and hidden things, but The small roundhouse held its own against the immense yet tiny perfect circle of human warmth and intention. Hush that settled now was total, complete silence, only broken by the biological necessity of breathe a deep quiet that encouraged the mind to slow its relentless turning to yield to the pull of the deep, heavy sleep had it been earned be. The long, slow labor of the daylight hours, the very notion of time seemed to warp and stretch. Her minutes dissolved into hours blended, into the deep stretch of nightly marked by the gradual cooling of the air and the dying embersa, slow drift toward the unseen moment of the returning light. The boy felt the ancient stone beneath the earth calling him deeper, inviting him to sink into the heavy stillness of the ground to become one with the slow enduring elements of his home earth, clay, the wood, the straw, the persistent, unmoving rock. He listened to the soft friction of the woolen cloak, rubbing gently a low whispering sound against the deeper silence he had texture heard rather than felt in the half-conscious space. This was the sound of safe enclosure of domestic protection. The air was still cool but not cold, a perfect equilibrium maintained by the thick insulating walls, and the low earthen mounded pocket of controlled atmosphere against the sharp exterior chill. This continuous careful maintenance of comfort was the core of their survival. Endless low-level labor of keeping things steady, secure, dry, the heavy darkness was now a friend, not a threat, a comforting blanket pulled high over the sleeping world, allowing the weary body and the tired mind necessary repair at time when nothing needed to be done, nothing needed to be watched inly, the pure, slow yielding to the powerful pull of unconsciousness. The shadows held motionless, clinging to the walls, fixed by the minimal, unchanging glow of the deepest embers. They were static, silent observers of the village's deep repose. The boy felt the weight of the structure. Above him, immense and ancient, burden of the roof pressing down, gently urging rest, a slow, heavy pressure that eased the muscles into surrender. He felt the entire settlement sinking deeper into the earth, anchored by the long history of its repetitive existence, yet profound stillness settling over the ramparts and the fallow fields. Slow rhythm of his own heartbeat became audible in the quieta, deep, soft drum beat marking the persistent flow of life here. Steady, reliable pulse mirroring the ancient predictable cycles. He followed that sound, that inner rhythm further down into the quiet space beyond waking, beyond memory, where only the weight of time and the comfort of the earth remained. The sense of the moor stretched out beyond the ditchless. Vast, a cold expanse of gorse and heather cloaked in mist and shadow, but the small circle of the village remained warm and contained a pocket of enduring human continuity against the relentless cold world. The slow sleep was deep and restorative, heavy, and slow, broken by urgency or unnecessary thought, a perfect replication of the slow, steady turning of the Iron Age night, a time of absolute peace within the ancient circular dwelling. The cool air of the deep chambers wrapped itself around the solitary lamplight. A hush descended upon the traveler's silence, so profound it seemed to absorb memory of sound itself. The ancient stone floor beneath was slicked with the dew of forgotten millennia, mirror for the spectral glow that pulsed from the narrow flame. Held high dust motes suspended in the thick subterranean atmosphere drifted like slow silverfish in the darkness, catching the amber radiance. The chamber was immense, wider and taller than any cathedral built above the surface of the world. Hollow, carved not by human hands alone, but shaped perhaps by the slow, relentless architecture of deep earth pressures. The explorer moved forward with deliberate slow siege, breath, and intrusionic footfall muted by the velvet layer of silt and obsidian dust high overhead. The ceiling dissolved into shadow, a vaulted immensity that suggested the collapse of mountain centuries long ago. The walls were not smooth, but composed of enormous basalt blocks perfectly fitted without mortar mastery, of weight and scale that defied simple engineering. It spoke of a people whose patience was as boundless as the desert sands. Outsidia civilization that understood the permanence of stone and the fleeting nature of deep thrumming stillness. Permeated the spacey, a low resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in the ear, but deep within the bone. It was the sound of geologic time passing, slow grinding turning of the planet itself. And then the light found it centered in the vast space stood. A monolith of dark green serpentina, a single block of stone, honed to an impossible smoothness its surface, drinking the light, yet reflecting the faint glow, was clearly the heart of the place of focus for whatever ritual or remembrance he had been. Housed within these deep confines, the explorer approached the serpentine altar, his steps, now even more measured reverent before the weight of history. The stone was cooled to the touch of temperature far below the Earth's natural heat as if it had perpetually harbored a core of glacial chill etched into the vertical face of the monolith were glyphs and figures not the familiar cuneiform of the upper cities or the common hieroglyphs of the Nile. These carvings were slender and deeply cut-filled with a fine silver pigment that had resisted the decay of the ages' script that seemed to whisper of stars and the deep geometries of the cosmos. Was a language not of spoken words, but of pure celestial observation. The central image was striking a procession of 6 figures elongated and crowned not with gold, but with halos of intricately carved light. They were clearly portrayed in attitudes of profound sleep, their eyes closed, their long robes flowing around them like water. Yet, beneath their recumbent forms were symbols of immense power, the coiled serpent of guardianship, descending lunar crescent and the inverted pyramid suggesting descent into the earth, were the sleeper legends whispered by the oldest shaman's figures who chose not death but perpetual sisto await some unknowable cosmic turning. The silver script around them spoke of the great hibernation, voluntary retreat from a world growing too loud, too fast, too careless. One of the script running directly beneath the head, the largest sleeper figure caught the lamp's light in a particular way, revealing an intricate cipher. Describe not the sleepers themselves, but the mechanism of their preservation. Secret of the hushed chamber detailed a kind of energetic laka. Silent field woven from magnetics and rare earth compounds decised to slow the passage of every physical process. The slowing of the hearth. Deceleration of cellular divisions. Virtual halt of time itself within a specified radius. The entire chamber felt like an apertusa massive clock stopped on a certain moment thousands of years ago. The air itself seemed unnaturally still devoid of the tiny currents and whispers that normally animate even the deepest cave systems the explorer's hand traced. The cold, hard curve of one carved shoulder feeling the dense weight of the serpentine stone. And as the fingers followed the contours of the Achinga, new understanding dawned a chilling recognition. The stone was not merely depicting the sleeper sit, was suggesting they were not symbolic. The script spoke of a doorway, a concealed passage built into the rock face, which led not to another chamber, but directly into the stasis field itself, a place where the 6 figures lay not memorialized in stone, but preserved in the flesh. The inscription grew denser, here a chaotic knot of glyphs that defied immediate translation. But the recurring symbols were unmistakable, double-keyed, revolving lunar geta, the chamber of final rest. The explorer lifted the lamp high on, slowly turned toward the nearest wall, basalt blocks, light trembling slightly now. The stone was smooth and impenetrable. The ancient engineers of this place were masters of illusion and concealment. They would not have left it visible. Seemed not a single sign of passage for the uninitiated eye. The air grew perceptibly colder near this walla, localized drop in temperature that defied the overall thermal stability of the cavern. That was the boundary of the stasis field, a subtle chill radiating from the mechanism beyond the stone. The scent in the air changed to earthy dampness of the cave, yielding to something drier, sharper, a strange mineral smell, almost like ozone, faint metallic tang of incredible power restraint. The explorer placed a palm against the cold basalt, seeking a variation in vibration, a hollow sound, a thermal anomaly. The stone resisted it, felt solid, permanent. But the imagery on the monolith, promise of the sleepers, drew the attention back. The sleepers were the Cather return prophesied to mark a great change in the world's axis, reordering of time and purpose to. Find them was to touch the source of this lost knowledge of reason for the deep silence of this subterranean sanctuary. A specific sequence of symbols on the altar base seemed to mirror the pattern of the stones on the nearby walla. Subtle map etched in shadow and silver following. The lines with painstaking curry, the explorer began to understand, yet their presence is mundaneho, a few sickle blades. They too await the repetitive duty of the fields, the digging, the cutting, the slow, steady harvest. The entire world revolves around these simple acts. The Celtic life here is a quiet cyclic resistance. To change a deep immersion in the expected, the sleep that comes here is earned by this consistencia, profound surrender to the absolute repetition of. The hours and the seasons we settle into the feeling of the heavy thatch roof above us, smell of the persistent wood smoke around us, drone of the quern, stone turning endlessly. The village breathes slowly in its ancient place, and we breathe slowly with it, finding stillness in the unchanging silence of the Iron Age routine. The deep quiet holds you within the soft embrace of the earth walls and the rhythm of the turning stone. Nothing is demandingly. Rest only the steady, inevitable repetition of the ancient world, letting the dust settle, letting the hours pass unmarketing the hushed comfort of the enduring roundhouse deep within the sleep of ages. The clay path still held the chill of the dia, cold dampness rising slowly through the solace of the worn leather boots. A familiar pressure beneath the feet where countless similar steps had pressed the same dull earth over centuries. The sun, now merely a rumor behind the low line of the western ridge, had yielded its brief authority to the deepening bluea color that promised only the long stillness of the night and the relentless patient. Cold, the air itself felt thick now, not with mist, but with the heavy suspended scent of peat smoke and the sharper metallic tang of the nearby middenware. The refuse of the day slowly decomposed into the earth, a slow exchange of substance and time. The rounded shoulders of the roundhouses stood squat against the failing light there. Thatched domes appearing dark and heavy like great brooding mushrooms sprung from the damp ground. Each spire of smoke rose straight and true, a column dissolving slowly into the upper air, a silent marker of the living heat within where the slow evening work awaited. There was a muffled sound of movement from one of the nearest dwellings, a low grind, the quern stone still turning, perhaps grinding the course. Hard kernels of spelta sound of relentless labor that permeated the quiet of the coming dark. The rhythm was uneven, hesitant. Hands guiding the heavy runner stone, weary now from hours of a tiny scratch in the vast silence. The rough wattle and daub walls of the nearest hut were deeply scored, etched by rain and wind, outer layer of clay peeling slightly in certain place, rubbling. The faint pale skeleton of hazel branches beneath a complex woven shield against the dampness. The entrance to the dwelling was cloaked by a heavy curtain of animal hide stretched taut and cured. Roughly it hung heavy and still against a narrow opening, providing a necessary barrier against the inevitable cold draft that sought every crevice a hand reached out, feeling for the edge of the stiff, hideli fingers moving across the dry, coarse surface heath. Hide smelling faintly of wood smoke and the salt of sweat. It was a texture utterly familiar, utterly unchanged since the first time it was touched. Heavy drape was pushed aside slowly, a small sigh of displaced air escaping the hootin. The atmosphere shifted abruptly from the external chill and damp to the internal warm. Hazy, a sudden immersion in the heat of the central hearth. The air inside was thick, slow moving and deeply flavored with the dry sweetness of the burning wood mixed with the sharper aroma of scorched fat and stale grain, a composite scent of dwelling and existence. Ceiling overhead was lost in the gloom, the rafters of the roof, structured deeply black and coated over the generations by the slow patient, deposit pseudo-velvety layer of ancient smoke that hung above the heads of the occupants, a dark insulating blanket. The floor beneath the feet was packed earth hardened by time and pressure uneven in places where the constant traffic had created slight hollow small dips and rises that the foot navigated without conscious thought. Sense of deep grounding emanated from this floor, earth of the outside world, brought inside and made tame. The light came only from the central fiery, a glowing mass of slow burning embers, and occasional small tongues of orange flame. It cast long, slow-moving shadows around the curved inner wall, making the simple domestic items stored. There appear large and indistinct face shapes on the periphery of the vision. By the firelight knelt a figure already engaged in the unhurried ritual of the evening. The hands moved, slowly, steadily occupied, with the task of separating the clean wool, fiber preparing the raw material for the spindle. Wool was a natural, dull cream color course to the touch, still holding the residual oils of the shipa. Slight stickiness clinging to the fingertips, she pulled gently at the tangled nest, easing the fibers apart into loose, airy cloudsure, breath soft, and even in the stillness, the silence was profound, broken only by the small sounds inherent to the space. The hiss of sap releasing itself from a log into the fire. Minute crumbling sound as a piece of dried clay flaked from the inner wall, and the soft rhythmic whisper of the fire. Itself a low, intimate breathing sound. The fire was not roaring or dramatic, it was a quiet worker efficiently, converting the heavy dead weight of the wood into usable warmth. The logs were placed carefully, leaning together, allowing the air to draw through them, slowly entering a long, slow burn that would last until the deep morning hours. Heat radiating outward was substantial, a wave of comfort pushing back against the encroaching night. It warmed the skin of the face and hand spelling the deep coldness from the muscles. The figure by the fire picked up the spindle whorl, a small, heavy disc of ancient stone or fired clay, etched perhaps with the simplest of marks, a whirl of power and industry. The wooden shaft was thin and straight, polished smooth by the thousands of rotations it had performed. Process began. The fine strand of prepared wool attached to the shaft. The hand gave a quick, gentle turn, and the whirl dropped, spinning rapidly downward, the small hypnotic blur near the packed earth floor. Sound of spinning was a soft whirring hiss, a mechanical whisper of creation. The spinner watched the thread, forming her gaze steady and unblinking. Length of thread slowly accumulating around the wooden shaft each rotation, adding the smallest fraction of length in incremental, active, persistent industry. This was the core activity of the long evening transformation of the shorn fleece into the protective thread. The slow, steady turning of the whorl was the metronome of the Celtic year, marking the passage of time, not in great events, but in the smooth accumulation of necessary objects. The shadows played their slow game on the curved wall, expanding, contracting, stretching as the firelight subtly altered its intensity. One shadow detached itself from the wall. Deep, elongated outline of the doorpost and seemed to stretch across the sleeping space, reaching toward the stacked pots and leather vessels near the back. The space was simple, utterly practical, distinct only for warmth, protection, and rest. There were no distractions or anything to divert the eye or the mind. Low bedding platforms lined the inner circumference of the wall, piled high with thick hides and coarse woven blankets, waiting for the eventual retreat into the deep quiet of sleep. The outer world seemed miles distant now. Wind sounds over the thatch were dampened and diffused, transferred into a simple, sustained human lullaby provided by the patient structure itself. The rhythmic dropping of the spindle whirl continued, a small tap on the earth floor, for the hand gently raised it for the next spin. Cycle repeating over and over, an ancient, mesmerizing loop. The spinner's concentration was total, but it required no soft muscles of the fingers and wrists knew the action perfectly. Mind was free to wander the simple paths of memoria, to rest completely in the sheer physical repetition. The light began to deepen from orange to a deep, rich amber as the larger pieces of wood began to settle into coal. Heart of the fire was now a solid, concentrated mass of hita, nucleus of warmth that pulsed slowly. The air directly above the embers shimmered, slightly distorting the outline of the roof beams above. The eyes felt heavy, weighted by the smoke and the ceaseless warmth. A profound sense of inevitability settled over the species, knowledge that this moment was merely one in a chain of link connecting this evening to the 1,000 evenings that came before, and the 1,000 more that would follow. The simple life was the truest form of existence here. A continuous loop of requirement and suppy of sewing and harvesting, of shearing and spinning. It was not exciting, it was profoundly, reliably comforting monotony. Spindle whorl dropped the sound, softer this time. A spinner perhaps nearing the end of the length of fiber. The quiet was stretching itself thinner and thinner, approaching the point of perfect stillness. The village outside was now entirely hushed. Few stray sounds of the day completely extinguished. Only the smallest movements from a shifting of the earth beneath the foundation. Slow crawl of an insect in the thatch sounds. So minute they only emphasized the deep pervasive silence. She paused the work finality. Small shaft of wood now wrapped neatly with its accumulated thread, a precious length of future cloth secured. The hands felt the mild ache of prolonged repetitive. Modio in a dull, comforting stiffness. She reached slowly for the heavy earthenware. Bowl cold clay against the fingertips and took a slow draught of the stored water. The water tasted only of the earth in the clay vessel, cool and flat against the back of the throat. The movement itself was an immense effort, as if the air had thickened around the limbs, resisting swift action. The body was entering the slow state of winding down with heavy preparation. The light spread slowly across the vaulted ceiling, revealing a ceiling mural images of celestial navigation and slow. Drifting continents emerged from the gloom. A ship carved of moonwood sailed across the painted firmament. Its silent sailors wore masks of silent resignation and immense wisdom. The sudden illumination showed us where the true passage lay, hidden behind a shifting of perfectly fitted bedrock, smoothed by time. We slipped through the narrow gap with deliberate care and minimal sound. The ancient stone groaned, a low resonant sound of great age protesting our passing. The air instantly grew colder, thick with mineral moisture and sea tang. It tasted of salt and the distant memory of great and terrible tides. We began the slow, patient descent down steps carved millennia ago. Each step was worn concave by the patient passage of vanished feet. The steps spiraled downwards into a lightless, profound well of silence. I could hear the slow drip, drip, drip of water far below us. Liquid rhythm measuring the agonizing slowness of geological eternity. This was the quiet threshold of the deep hidden places, where the surface history held no jurisdiction and time moved differently. The descent felt like an undoing, a slow peeling back of civilization. We counted the worn steps 102 through the long descent into sleep. The fire now needed attention. A scoop of dried peat fuel lay nearby dark. Dense blocks of compressed ancient bog stored carefully for the long night. She placed the heavy sods gently onto the glowing embers, covering the heart of the fire completely. This was the final act of a day's heat management banking. The fire sealing the light and warmth beneath a heavy lid of slow-burning fuel, the amber glow. Immediately dimmed soft by the dark peat dust, the flames receded, swallow it, leaving only the promise of slow smoldering heat, a steady, unwavering warmth that would carry them through the darkest hours. The smoke thickened momentarily as the peat caught a rich, earthy smell, filling the air before settling into a slow, invisible release of heat. The shadows on the wall softened, blending into a deeper velvet darkness. The roundhouse was becoming one immense enclosed shadow, punctuated only by the faint reddish glow. Where the peat lay heaviest, there was nothing left to be done. Long day had yielded its gifts: food, warmth, security. The mind began to drift tunward from the necessity of sight, relying entirely on the subtle sensations of the small space. The feel of the wool blanket as it was pulled over the shoulders, subtle rustle of the dry grass packed beneath the sleeping hide, the steady, slow breathing of the others already deep in sleep, filling the dark with a reassuring soft roar. Weight of time felt monumental here. Each small action was connected to an endless lineage of the same wool, the same fire, the same clay floor. Boredom was not empty or painful, it was fulfilled with the deep truth of continuation, the quiet of the ancient stone village pressed on a protective shell of silence. Tomorrow the sun would return and the repetitive circuit of tasks would begin. The long, slow sleep was finally here, a heavy velvet curtain drawn across the world, a deep, hypnotic stillness. The red glow of the banked fire was the last thing seen, a patient, enduring heart, and the darkness a promise of the heat that still waited under the heavy, cold blanket of the British night. The ancient earth held its breath and waited for the turn of the world to bring the slow, dull light. The deep sleep comes now, a heavy, slow descending to the long, profound silence and the weight of the unchanging stone. The peace of the simple circle surrounds a quiet, unending, ancient peace. Sleep now, deeply sleep, now sleep. Now the air here was a fine powder of forgotten breath. I held the scent of millennia of undisturbed darkness, a quiet rustle of mica flakes sliding down the obsidian wall. The Single shaft of moonlight fractured upon the slate floor, each shadow seemed to lengthen, slowly reaching into the hushed corners. We stood within the sepulchral heart of the forgotten archives. Weight of the earth pressed down above us like a shroud of deep slumber. A profound stillness settled upon our shoulders like velvet. Thus the glyphs etched into the ancient stone defied immediate understanding. They were neither cuneiform nor the known scripts of the Western. Sure, a strange swirling geometry suggested an antediluvian hand at work. Each symbol was complex, a tiny vortex of meaning cloaked in deep enigma. I traced the cold relief with a hesitant fingertip, seeking some ingress. Surface felt impossibly smooth, almost polished by vanished time. We were seeking the chronicle of the sunken king, the legend whispered in hushed tones, but this script spoke only the language of absolute silence, language only understood, perhaps, by the deepest currents of the sea. Breath of warm air suddenly moved through the chamber. It was not a natural draft, but something emanating from the stone itself. A faint amber light began to bloom near the central lintel above us. It was the color of preserved honey, reflecting the deep shadows around the pyramid 9 steps down. Atmosphere grew heavier, the pressure palpable. Upon the eardrums, the glow of our single lantern seemed weak and easily consumed by the darkness below. Use lay the cavern floor wider than the chamber above it. Expanse of black polished stone, slick with constant subterranean moisture. The cavern breathed, slowly exhaling cold, damp air laced with mineral iron. In the center stood a circular platform of dark, polished marble upon. It rested a single object, perfectly preserved and intensely significant. It was a sphere of purest quartz, almost the size of a human skull. It pulsed with the faint inner light of captured starlight centuries old. The stone sphere was not an artifact of crafting, but of finding it. Seemed to hold within it the entire condensed essence of the ocean floor. I approached the platform with caution, my footsteps absorbed by the damp air. The silence here was deeper than any natural stillness I had ever known. It was a manufactured silence designed to guard ancient secrets. As I reached out my hand toward the cold crystalline surface, a low harmonic resonance began to emanate from the sphere itself. It was not loud, but it penetrated deep into the structure of bone. Sound of immense weight and unimaginable velocity. Held captive, it was the sound of the world turning slowly beneath a mantle of ice ore, the muffled crash of waves upon a forgotten sunken shore. The quartz was intensely cold, absorbing all the ambient warmth. I drew back my hand, feeling the subtle psychic weight of the object. This sphere was a conduit, perhaps a key to the sunken king's domain. It spoke not with words, but with the terrible language of pure memory. Stood utterly still beneath the colossal weight of the earth, listening to the soft, unrelenting hum of the crystalline guardian. The air suddenly shifted, growing unnaturally warm for a moment. The sphere intensified its pulsing light, becoming almost blindingly bright, and then the silence was broken, not by the dripping water or the hum, but by a sound that seemed to come from inside the deep rock walls. A low guttural drag, a slow movement of immense friction. It was the sound of colossal, unseen mechanisms turning slowly far below her. Perhaps the muffled song of the shifting geological plates beneath the continent. We paused, holding our breath in the absolute depressive darkness of the chamber. The humid air pressed closer, suffocating the lingering hope of easy retreat. And in that moment of perfect stillness, I felt something else move, not a cold touch, but the slow movement of a vast cold shadow. It seemed to drift past us without displacing the chilled cavern air, a fleeting presence of immense age silently observing our deepest intrusion. The strange grinding sound faded, leaving only the echo of its own absence. We were utterly alone, yet utterly surrounded by ancient unseen observers. The path ahead disappeared into an endless black velvet void of unknown passageway. Took the next slow step, knowing the quiet, profound mystery was deepening infinitely. The crystal sphere pulsed one last time. Before dimming to a faint ghostly shimmer, the spindle turned with its low, incessant sound, a hypnotic drone woven into the quiet breath of night. It was the sound of persistence, the soft turning of time within the confines of the longhouse wall's wool. The color of winter moss slipped tirelessly through fingers smoothed by years of this endless task. Each minute twist of the fiber, each pull and release of the raw fleece was deliberate. slow countess silent metric of existence in the deep heart. Of ancient Britain, the fire had sunk to a bed of glowing coals of vast soft red, pulsing beneath a film of white oak. Ash, this deep ruby light spilled weakly across the uneven floor of packed earth, revealing the faint circular depressions left by the heavy footfall of generations' shadows stretched long and distorted, climbing the curved eternal walls of the dwelling. They danced, only slightly reacting to the infrequent collapse of the remaining charcoal. A profound stillness settled upon the air. Heavy and absolute, the smoke rose, not aggressively, but with a languid upward drift seeking the eye of the roof vent. The smoke hole cut into the heavy density of the thatchet, hung in a low, persistent cloud just beneath the dark rafters and olfactory. Comfort that spoke of wood smoke and dried herbs and the faint tang of peat. You could almost taste the deep, cool silence of the iron. Aged night settling around youth. Lintel above the entrance, a thick carved piece of ancient bog oak stood sentinel it. Felt cold and utterly immovable guardian against the chaotic wind and the unknown. Darkness outside, inside was security, repetition, warmth, and the profound absence of urgency here. Nothing rushed, no event demanded sharp attention, only the necessity of quiet maintenance. The world outside the high earthen rampart, the ditch, and the wooden palisade might be wild and uncertain. It might hold the distant rumor of chariots or the faint murmur of conflict far across the misty lowlands, but here beneath the thick protective roof was only the predictable peace of the settlement. Heavy set of the wattle and daub walls, the mixture of clay and mud and straw felt comforting. It was a smell of enclosure, of being firmly held within a small known boundary. You could hear the soft scuff of the straw bedding as someone shifted in their deep slumber, a low rustle immediately subsumed by the overarching quiet. The repetitive daily routines were the true structure of this civilization. The yet endless grinding of grain between the saddle querns. Patient weaving of wool into heavy dents. Close, slow, steady mending of tools, and the tireless upkeep of the hearth fire. These tasks held a hypnotic quality, a profound monotony that demanded no thought, only the slow movement of the body. It was the very essence of deep relaxation. This lack of incident, this reliable sameness, the moon perhaps a slender crescent high above the moorland, cast no perceptible light through the thick walls. Only the hearth remained the only internal source of illumination, now sinking further into its final hush, each ember a slow dying star, holding on to its intense internal heating, the dry matter. Into the ultimate inert fine powder of ash, this small dog curled near the edge of the fire pit, breathed in short, soft puffs. Its sleep was as deep and undisturbed as the ancient stone foundations beneath the building, listening closely beyond the sound of the breathing and the slow turning spindle. There's the low, soft whisper of the brook that runs just outside the protective ring. It is an unending liquid sound, the water moving eternally over smooth river stone that has been constant since long before this small village was established. It speaks of geologic time, of endless erosion of movement that never tires. It is the counterpoint to the human stillness, the reminder of nature's slow, perpetual flow. The heavy oak door, though, secured by a thick leather thong, offered a sense of finality. Nothing would pass through it until the first pale gray light of the morning. The air within the roundhouse felt dense and slightly stale, warmed by many bodies, and the central fire was the smell of shared humanity, of simple survival of a small clan held together by necessity and blood. Darkness outside was absolute, cloaked in a heavy velvet qualia. Silence that the wind only occasionally dared to break when the wind did arrive. It carried a low, mournful sigh as it swept over the high bank of the ramparta, sound like the slow friction of earth. Against earth, you could imagine the tall timbers of the palisade standing silent and rigid against the dark, their pointed tops guarding the sleep of those within this small sanctuary. The concept of hurry had no place here. Everything was governed by the sun's slow arc and the moon's careful cycle. There was always time to watch the fire die. There was always time to finish the slow turn of the thread. The spindle was a small mechanical universe in motion, its slow revolution a gentle assurance. It was the rhythmic pulse of the economy, of the survival of this small corner of the island. Let your mind settle into the rhythm of the spinning. Let the sound subsume any stray thoughts. Allow the warmth of the banked fire to permeate the deep chill that tries to cling to your shoulders. Feel the great weight of the thatched roof. Above you, a tremendous shield against the vastness of the sky. The silence outside the walls is not empty. It is full of deep breathing and soft animal sounds. Low, soft clucking of the chickens nestled tightly in their woven baskets. Slow, heavy chewing sound of the tethered ponies in the nearby enclosure. All these sounds are low and dull, muffled by the thick protective layers of the settlement. They are the sounds of life continuing uninterrupted in its deeply repetitive fashion. No sudden noise, no sharp movement disturbs this profound Celtic calm. The hours stretch out before you, long and dark and utterly restful. You are held within the security of the ancient stone, the heavy timber, and the quiet presence of your sleeping neighbors. Iron Age was not a time of frantic activity, but of patient, enduring stability. Repetition was not a burden. It was the very guarantee of life's continuing nature. The same field would be plowed, the same crop sown, the same tools used century after slow century. This endless recurrence is the true soothing quality of this ancient village. It is the profound knowledge that tomorrow will look exactly like today, and that this reliable monotony will gently carry you into the deepest, most restful kind of slumber. Feel the deep weight of time itself slowing down, folding inward. The minutes stretch into slow hours, the hours into vast blocks of peaceful darkness. The smoke from the hearth continues its slow, relentless upward curl. Amber light diminishes further to a mere suggestion of warmth. You are drifting now, fully enveloped in the protective cloak of the Iron Age night, listening only to the soft, continuous hum of the world's most ancient and soothing rhythm, the tireless, slow spinning of the thread. The light that spilled across the packed earth floor now softened, bled into hues of heavy gold and approaching gray. The shadows stretched long-fingered across the woven wall panels. Deep quiet began to settle upon the hollowed slopes of the hill fort. The distant bleating of the folded sheep faded into mere memory. Only the immediate sound remained within the sheltering curve of the roundhouse. The soft crackle of the central fire drawing its slow breath. The low rhythmic sigh of the glowing embers, a sound of deep contentment. Survival. The day's rough edges were smoothed by the creeping darkness. The air hung heavy and thick with the scent of wood smoke and dried herbs. A comforting perfume pressed down upon the weary shoulders. Within the hearth space, the slow work of preparing. The evening meal continued. A single bronze cauldron hung suspended from its tripod, its smooth metallic curve catching the flickering light in brief flashes. It was etched with the grime of countless meals, silent record of seasons and shared hunger. Broth within simmered with a low, constant murmur, bubbling whisper that promised warmth. The sound of the grinding stone persisted, a steady scrape of hard grit against harder grit. The saddle quern demanded devotion, requiring the slow, relentless labor of the hands back and forth. The heavy upper stone traveled, a monotonous mechanical rhythm that anchored the mind. It was the pulse of the household, turning the hard kernels of spelt into useful, heavy flour. A slow, deliberate cycle that had repeated for 1,000 mornings and would repeat for 1,000 more, each grain crushed under the weight of tradition. A cloud of fine white dust settled on the workers' forearms, creating a pale sleeve against the darker skin. The dust tasted faintly sweet and earthy on the tongue, a promise of the bread that would rise tomorrow. There was no hurry in this movement, only the ancient understanding that necessity required patience. Stone was cool and unyielding beneath the palms, its weight a familiar pressure, a reminder of the earth's endless bounty and endless demand outside. The thick plank door of the air was turning velvet. The chill of the coming night began to press against the clay walls, but the thick clay was a faithful barrier, absorbing the day's residual warmth and gently releasing it back into the living space. The roof of interwoven thatch stood dark and impenetrable above Thema. Dome of rustling grasses held fast by hazel rods, a perfect shelter against the sweeping storms of the western sea. In the corner near the stored baskets, the sound of weaving began, the light clack and soft tension of the loom. Meaner key accompaniment to the fire's deeper hum. Linen threads were being painstakingly drawn tight, creating the strong, durable cloth needed for tunics and wrappings. The The work demanded focused stillness eyes, tracing the path of every single thread. Pattern emerging, slowly lined by precise linear geometrical poetry taking shape. The colors were muted earth tones, the deep reds drawn from madder root, the dull yellows extracted from wild welt. Natural pigments fixed fast into the rough wool. The hands moved with an economy of effort. Years of repetition had taught them the exact measure of tension, the perfect moment. To draw the shuttle, the air within the longhouse grew stiller now. The voices hushed to low murmurs, words spoken in the ancient tongue soft. Gentle sounds that dissolved quickly into the smoke. No need for urgency or loud address, everything necessary was close at hand. The thick woolen blankets neatly folded on the sleeping platforms. The storage jars sealed tightly against the damp. The tools resting in their designated places, each item possessed a purpose and a patina of use, a deep glossy smoothness. On the wooden bowl, the bone knife worn precisely to the curve of the hand objects imbued with the energy of human labor, they reflected the firelight faintly, small amber glows scattered through the darkness. The smell of boiling herbs rose gently from the cauldron, a pungent, slightly bitter aroma. The medicinal leaves gathered weeks ago, now releasing their strength. The long day spent turning the soil or tending the small herds or repairing the palisade defenses, that wearying effort. Now slowly receding, replaced by a profound physical relaxation, the weight of the body settling heavy onto the rough woven matting. A delicious surrender to the end of the light. A small child stirred on the far side of the hearth. A muffled, sleepy sound quickly soothed the presence of the family surrounding Thema. Dense, unshakable core of warmth, the sense of being utterly protected by the thick earthen ring of the settlement, safe from the wild, untamed. Darkness outside the ramparts, the weight of the protective stones pressed down upon the valley floor, ancient stones placed by ancestors, long since turned to dust. But their work remained a silent, enduring legacy of caution and communal effort. The wooden spoons dipped into the savory broth carried the steaming liquid slowly to the lips, the heat spreading through the chest, a simple nourishment, entirely satisfying. The taste of simple grain and foraged root, the substance of survival made palatable, the slow chew of the heavy, slightly dense bread baked earlier in the dying heat of the coals, its crust dark and slightly chewy, its interior thick and filling. The body accepting the fuel it desperately needed, moving toward the stillness of sleep. The rhythmic scrape of the quern finally ceased. The stones fell silent, a sudden emptiness in the soundscape. Miller's hands brushed clean of the flour dust, the stone surface smooth and ready for the morning's return. Tools of the day placed carefully aside, the sickle blade polished against the piece of soft leather, the edges protected against the damp night air, every action a small ritual of preservation, respect. For the objects that provided life, the fire was gently bank covered with a mound of ash to hold the core of. Heat, a hidden glowing heart beneath the gray blanket, a small plume of gray smoke escaping, slowly curling. Up towards the smoke hole in the roof apex, the roof was cloaked in the deep, impenetrable blackness, now only the faintest scatter of the far high. Stars visible through the opening, distant cold lights, indifferent to the small warm life below. Walls of wattle and daub held the air in a perfect pocket of breath. The sounds of the village outside grew almost imperceptible, only the occasional soft lowing of a cow from the animal pen, or the quiet movement of the night watchman on the rampart walk. His slow, heavy pacing a guarantee of safety. A deep sense of time slowed almost to a halt, the moments stretching out, long and undefined, like the shadows creeping across the floor when the fire was low, the feeling of the woven sleeping mat beneath the back course. But yielding the familiar scent of dried meadowsweet pressed into the bedding, a soft herbal fragrance meant to lull and cleanse. Heavy weight of the coarse woolen blanket pulled tight, trapping the precious bodily heat, the body sinking deeper and deeper into the rest it had earned. Slow, steady breathing of those already lost to sleep, a collective deep exhalation, a shared vulnerability in the dark, the mind beginning its slow descent, drifting away from the demands of the daylight world, floating. On the currents of the fire's whisper, the embers pulsed a faint orange light, casting slow, shifting patterns on the rough Wood beams overhead, the beams darkened by centuries of smoke etched with the history of the house, each knot and groove a silent witness. The wood itself felt ancient and enduring, cut from the oak forests that still surrounded the fort, bound together with simple leather thongs, a structure that stood against the ceaseless wind. The air cooled slightly as the fire diminished, further drawing the sleeper closer into the embrace of the heavy blankets. A profound sense of isolation and security combined, knowing that the dark earth held them safe and the sturdy timber protected them from the sky. Imagination beginning to conjure gentle shapes in the shadows. Not fear, but merely the shifting phantoms of the deep dark. They held no menace, only the promise of dream. The long, slow rhythm of the night watchman's footsteps repeated, a slow, measured counterpoint to the steady drumming of the heart. Each footfall reassuring, confirming that alertness stood guard while the village slept. The ancient stone gate of the fort stood massive and uncompromising, barred with thick timbers holding back the wilderness, holding safe the small fragile core of human warmth, the rough texture of the wool against the cheek, the familiar metallic tang of the lingering smoke on the breath, the absolute comfort found in the repetition of these nightly sensations, a comfort that transcended the simple needs of the body. It was the comfort of belonging, of knowing one's place in the slow, relentless turning of the season, of knowing that the sun would always rise over the eastern hills and the slow labor would begin anew. Weight of the century settled lightly upon the sleeper, a continuous unbroken chain of days and nights. Iron Age village drifting deeper into its slumber, cloaked entirely in the hushed embrace of the cool night air, the fire now only a memory of heat, a soft low glow beneath the white ash dome, a patient heart waiting for the return of the morning light. The silence now complete and unbroken, only the sound. Deep, slow, steady breathing. A breathing that matched the massive, slow breathing of the earth itself. Inhale. Slowly exhale. Completely deeper and deeper into the quiet dark, letting go of every thought and every unnecessary tension, sinking into the ancient certainty of the shelter. The smooth clay walls holding the world at bay, the thick thatch a protective cap against the cold sky. Nothing to fear, nothing to do, only the long, slow journey toward the deepest rest, the feeling of the heavy blankets, the scent of the dry earth, the perfect stillness of the dark. A profound peace settled upon the longhouse, a stillness broken only by the necessary rhythm of life, sustained, the rhythmic rise and fall, the slow, deep breath carrying the sleeper further away from the wakeful world into the comforting darkness of the ancient Celtic night. Dust settled slowly, a million powdered moments floating in the deep amber light, a fine veil of ancient sleep. Descending across the smooth obsidian floor, we drifted through that stillness, our boots muffled by layers of silt and forgotten time. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the silence of millennia. Potent narcotic easing the restless mind. Imagine the hushed cool of the stone embracing you now, a perpetual winter. Held fast against the relentless sun above, we traced the carvings along the wall face, each symbol etched with precision beyond human comprehension. They spoke of cycles of moons and the deep geometry of the stars languages lost even to the deep archives of memory. The corridor narrowed subtly, drawing us further inward into the subterranean heart of this cloaked structure. The light source we carried struggled against the vast gloom, casting elongated shadows that danced like phantom guards. We felt the slow, undeniable inertia of this place, a powerful pull toward profound slumber. It was here that the architecture shifted, smooth walls yielding to rougher hewn granite. The change was sudden, stark, a geological whisper of transition. We stood before a single massive lintelunerdurnd, unlike the detailed passages we had traversed below. It rested a shallow depression-filled water that did not move, a pool of liquid stillness, mirroring only the dark ceiling. This water held no reflection of our lamps, only an infinite void, a deep velvet black. A low, continuous murmur began to resonate from the depths, not sound exactly, but a vibration felt through the solace of our feet. It was the deep, slow breathing of the earth exhaling the weight of history into our awareness. Let that low sound become a cradle. Now Rhythmic pulse guiding your own slow breath in and out, a quiet surrender to the quiet. We kneeled beside the water, seeking its secret to smelled faintly of ozone and crushed mineralsa. Clean metallic tang cutting through the musty air. The surface was utterly placid, undisturbed by any draft. We knew instantly this was no ordinary cistern, but a threshold, a boundary to something else entirely. We extended a hand toward the dark mirror, hesitating. Just above the slick cold water, and then we perceived it, not in the water, but beneath a faint, persistent luminescence. Was the color of old ochre-dried blood mixed with pale moonlight. It pulsed slowly, deliberately, like a dying heart. We watched. The gentle swelling and fading of this internal light for countless minutes, suspended between wonder and deep awe. It offered no heat, no sound, no vibration, only the silent promise of revelation. Perhaps this was the inner light spoken of in the oldest myths, illumination granted only to those who cease seeking and simply allow themselves to receive. Let your mind drift toward that silent, pale fire. Now feel the coolness of the air on your exposed skin and the immense pressure of the ancient stone, holding you safe. The luminescence beneath the water began to resolve itself. As simple light, but as intricate crystalline forms, they shifted like ice flowers, blooming in slow motion, unfurling. Delicate geometries that defied physics, each crystalline. Petal was etched with minute symbols, too small to discern, too numerous to count. They were the atoms of memory, the building blocks of a forgotten cosmos rising slowly within that liquid darkness. Realized the water was not water at all, but something denser, something that carried weight. It was flowing mercury, perhaps, or liquid silver, heavy and mysterious. I remembered the warnings of those who guarded these deep possessed, the stories of treasures that required the deepest sacrifice. We pulled back, our reaching hand slowly, gently respecting the boundary, respecting the profound quiet. The air grew perceptibly cooler on the lintilla. Sudden chilling draft, moving against the established warmth, it carried the faintest whisper of movimenta sound. Too subtle for the ear to register fully, we turned our heads, scanning the deep shadows behind. But there was nothing but the comforting gloom, the source of the draft. Was the stone itself? It seemed to be exhaling the cold of vast deep. Chambers further within, chambers that had not known the touch of air for thousands of years. Realization brought with it a profound sense of isolation. We were the only living breath in this immense subterranean mausoleum. The weight of that solitude pressed gently upon the eyelids, encouraging the slow surrender to rest. We took one last long, deliberate look at the pool of stillness, the pale ochre light performing its slow, silent dance. Crystalline structures beneath began to fade back into the velvet void, as if knowing their silent message had been received. We felt the deep hypnotic toll of the ancient Stonia comfort beyond any we had known above the earth. The stones here were inert, yet somehow profoundly alive, holding the ghost of every person, every thought, every movement they had. Witnessed. Allow yourself to feel that heavy quiet now. Sense of being held securely by the sleeping mountain. We retreated a few slow, deliberate steps, moving backward through the corridor of etched symbols. The amber glow of our lamps softened the granite edge, turning the passage into a dream. Tunnel, we moved further into the influence of that low earth murmur, letting the rhythm stabilize the beating of our own heart. We knew the secret of the silver pool remained locked away, but the structure had granted us passage further inward. Next chamber was hinted at by the growing colder space waiting just beyond our current reach. It promised vastness and shadows beyond our small lamp's power. It promised the deepest secrets hidden behind the thickest veil. Paused at a bend in the passage where the darkness ahead deepened. The air no longer smelled of minerals, but something sharper, something like ozone and old parchment decaying slowly. And from that impenetrable darkness, a new sensation arose entirely without warning. It was a delicate warmth against the back of the neck, a breath. That was not air, but pure heat. We froze instantly. Every muscle taut against the sudden anomaly. There was no source of fire, no logical reason for that warmth. It lingered for a moment like a soft inquiry before receding back into the absolute gloom. It felt as though we were being watched, or perhaps followed. An unseen guardian whose presence was only marked by temperature, warmth, where there should only be the cold silence of a deep earth. A silent, unblinking attention focused entirely upon us. We stood suspended in that moment, a profound thermal Mysterized only sound now are slow, careful inhalation. The relentless, deep breathing of the world above us. Path ahead was swallowed whole by the intensifying shadow, but the warmth had marked the way. It was a sign, a beckoning and undeniable. Summons the darkness waited patiently, ready to reel what lay within. The heat took a final slow, deliberate breath, preparing to glide toward that soft thermal mysterito. Drift onward into the profound silent space where the watchful warmth lay. Hidden ready to greet us in the deeper cold, we allowed our light to falter, just slightly trusting the unseen guidance of that strange deep heat into the waiting silence of the untold secrets drifting. Into the ancient endless night the chamber breathes. Softly ahead of you, a hollow warmth in the profound quiet. The deep hush of the roundhouse clung like damp wool and mist only. The slowest exhalation of the peat fire remained a low amber pulse beat softly at the heart of the dwelling cloaked in the perfect velvet blackness of the Iron Age night. The air tasted of ancient smoke and the dry husks of harvested grain. Breath drawn by the sleepers was a soft rhythmic assertion, a steady, slow counterpoint to the endless silence outside the timber palisade. Rest now in the deepest well of the midnight hour, where time itself seems to pool and solidify into smooth ancient stone. The timbers above us groan, once a settling sound that speaks of long endurance. These heavy oak supports have held the weight of countless seasons, shielding the clan from the chill winds that sweep the dew-heavy hillsides. The thatch overhead is thick, a complex weaving of reed and straw. Natural barrier between the human warmth and the cold primeval sky. The central hearth, where the flames once danced with reckless energy, is now merely a warm depression of gray and pearl-colored ash holding. Within it, the final drowsy heat of the day that has gone. A small hand, perhaps belonging to a child, shifts in their sleep nearby. Rustle of the animal skin blankets is magnified in the quiet. Is the sound of coarse wool against the smooth hide of a hunted deer. Simple sound, entirely familiar, entirely unchanging. Tomorrow, that hand will be tasked with gathering kindling. The meticulous slow picking of dry twigs from the damp earth verge, the small rituals of survival repeat themselves in an endless perfect circle, and the comforting predictability of this repetition is what lulls the spirited, is the knowledge that the sun will return and the stream will still flow. The knowledge that the grain must be ground and the sheep must be brought in always. The same casks, always the same simple tools awaiting their purpose. The stone grinding quern rests, heavy and solid. Near the eastern wall, its surface etched with the fine pale dust of the last milling session, promise of the repetitive labor that awaits the first light. The motion of turning the upper stone upon the lower is hypnotic and pure, slow circular motion. That binds the body to the necessities of the earth grinding down the coarse kernels spelt into the flower of existence. Trace the quiet history of this very spot with our imagination. Thousands of nights have unfolded here under this same thick roof. The smells and the sounds of Iron Age sleep have remained constant. The low scent of rendered fat used for the lamp that has long since been snuffed out, a trace of stale beer made from fermented barley clings near the woven storage basket. These are the smells of deep routine of lives lived close to the simple earth hour. Minds drift, now acknowledging the unwavering steadiness of this life. There is no rush here, no urgent call to arms or dramatic sudden change. The days unfold like slow and rolling bolts of undyed linen, each hour exactly like the hour that came before it. Each season an echo of the season that has just passed away. World of the Celts was not defined by great written chronologies. It was defined by the deep internal rhythm of the harvest and the winter cold, by the movement of the sun across the sky and the phases of the moon. Deeply into the remnants of the glowing ember bedded is a miniature landscape of slow decay and lingering. Heat red glows that diminish then briefly intensify with the slightest passing draft. They're like tiny, watchful eyes in the otherwise complete dark. These eyes hold the memory of the wild bonfire of the evening meal, the shared meat, the murmured stories, the low laughter that faded. With the sunset, the voices of the elders speaking of the ancestors and the protective spirits now. Only the hushed silence remains a deep well for the soul to sink into. The coolness near your feet, the residual dampness from the earth floor, is insulated by packed clay and rushes, but the deep earth is always cold. This chill reminds us that we are sheltered, that we are separate from the wildness outside. The palisade, the ancient wood stretches away in a vast dark silence. The oak trees stand like monumental silent guardians, their leaves silvered by the hidden dew. Track leading toward the river crossing is submerged in the misty gloom. The simple track trod daily by the sheep and the herders. Tomorrow we will walk that track. Seeing the same moss on the same stones, hearing the same slow splash of the stream against the worn riverbank. The river is our constant friend, our provider, and our boundary. It flows onward, indifferent to the mundane, repetitive events of the village carrying the small debris of the land toward the great ocean. We do not think of the ocean tonight. We only think of the small world contained within these walls. The world defined by the circle of the roundhouse and the perimeter of the ditch dug. Deep and wide surrounding the dwelling cluster on this slight rise, a work of simple sustained effort built to keep the world politely at bay. It is a testament not to conflict, but to enduring practical care, the defenses against the unexpected against. The stray vol for the unseen threat, but mostly the world here is orderly, slow, and profoundly uneventful. Listen to the breathing of the sleepers around you. It is the sound of collective rest, the sound of shared human trust. No need for alarms, no sudden panicked movement of fear, just a deep, easy rhythm of human lungs drawing in the cold, slow air and expelling the warm, gentle breath back into the ancient space. You can feel the weight of the sheepskin covering your body, the primal comfort of soft animal hide against the cool skin. It is a connection to the creatures that graze in the low, distant fields. The sheep whose wool provides the thread, the felt the warmth for these cold nights. Their presence is integral to the monotony, their bleeding. A familiar soundtrack. Tomorrow the shepherd will move them slowly out of the pen, counting them with the simplest of numerical systems on knotted cords. Steady calculation that has not changed in 1,000 years. The day will demand only simple focus, unwavering attention to small tasks. The sharpening of the bronze tools, perhaps the mending of a broken fence. The slow, meticulous scraping of hides to prepare them for tanning. These tasks demand patience, a quiet, meditative absorption of the hands. They do not require the sharp anxieties of modern life, only the steady, slow focus on the immediate physical object. The smoothing of the wood, the shaping of the metal, the careful stitching of the leather. Imagine the hand holding the bronze awl, pushing it gently through the thick hide, the resistance of the material, the satisfying tear, then the passage of the strong fiber. Each movement is slow, deliberate, necessary. Is this profound, slow purpose that anchors the mind in the Iron Age. We are held fast by the requirements of the coming dawn, by the inevitable return to the simple cycle of food and shelter. This is the beauty of the boring life, the immense relief of knowing what comes next. There are no sudden leaps of destiny, only the gentle steps of daily survival. The embers fade, now a deeper, darker quality, overtaking the red glow. Shadows lengthen, becoming thicker, more opaque, more silent still. Sink further into the deep, soft feathering of pure Iron Age rest. The sleep here is heavy and dreamless, unburdened by the complexities of recorded history. Is a deep, primitive surrender to the rhythm of the breathing earth. Let the faint scent of peat smoke curl around your senses. Let the slow, repetitive drone of the wind outside the wattle daub walls carry your thoughts away toward the deepest well of sleep. The stone of the hearth is cold, now entirely cooled. The final vestiges of the day's warmth have been absorbed, leaving behind only the promise of the coming morning's work and the profound peace of the present. Uninterrupted moment, we wait in the silence, perfectly still, perfectly safe within the quiet circle, knowing that the Iron Age world turns slowly, deliberately, without haste. Sleep now in the steadfastness of the ancient village and moving unchanging until the first pale ray light filters down through the smoke hole. The fire now offers only a shallow sigh. Against the settling shadows, the light retreats slowly, pulling itself back into the dulling core of the peat bricks. Smoke lifts heavy and deliberate toward the roof vent. A gray veil that dissolves silently into the conical darkness above. The roundhouse air is thick with the sweet, earthy scent of dried bracken and the faintest trace of spilled milk. A deep, unwavering stillness settles upon the structure of woven willow and packed earth. The Hush is not empty. It is filled with the slow, soft breathing of the village sleepers. It is the sound of bodies. Heavy with the satisfying fatigue of simple manual work. The walls of daub and wattle are cool and damp against the reaching hand. The clay holds the chill of the outside world, but offers absolute silence fingerprints left by the builder's centuries. Ago remain etched forever in the firm surface. Centuries of hands, smoothing the interior centuries of routine, maintaining the integrity of the curved dwelling. Structure feels less like a built thing and more like a protective shell grown from. The very earth it rests upon it is a low, comforting curve of necessary shelter against the wide indifference of the wild night near. The sleeping pallets, the heavy stone quern rests motionless, its grinding finished hours before twilight. The rough grit of the last milled barley still clings to the shallow depressions in the ancient stone surface. The simple monumental weight of the upper stone presses down upon the lower piece, a silent promise of the labor that morning will demand this heavy. Circle of rock is the silent nucleus of the domestic existence. Here, the rhythm of its turning is the hidden pulse of the long repetitive year's time. In this place does not hurry, it merely collects and pools around the base of the central hearth. Post it settles deep into the bedding straw and gathers in the hollows of the worn clay floor. Every dawn that arrives is a soft, flawless echo of the one that preceded it. Every quiet twilight mirrors the last twilight perfectly in its slow descent there. Is a profound, deep comfort in this predictable, hypnotic cadence of existence. No sharp edges, no sudden unexpected alarms, only the gentle, unwavering current of the seasons. Circling outside the palisade, the wind whispers low over the sharpened defensive. Post it carries the distant, faint, metallic smell of the bog iron drying near the stream bed. The surrounding worked fields lie cloaked in a deep, velvet shadow, waiting patiently for the slow turn of the plowshares. They've been tilled and rusted, and turned since the memories of the oldest ancestors faded into the mist. The soil is dense and dark, holding the cold moisture of the deep. Autumn night is a quiet resting earth, smelling purely of dormancy and patient fertility. The small tools of the day lean quietly against the low walls, the wooden haft of the simple axe. Smoothed by friction and sweat waits for the morning chore of collecting fuel. The simple digging stick rests. Beside it, a tool that requires only human muscle and endurance. These objects possess the quiet dignity of repetition, never changing their shape or their function across the generations. They are the anchors of an unchanging existence, secure in their known utility. The woven storage baskets stand full and stout holding. The grain protected from the damp earth floor, their coiled sides are stiff and dry, keeping their cargo safe through the deepest wet of winter. The smell of dried rushes and stored kernels hangs. Near them, a scent of security and resourcefulness. Small accumulation of necessary things is the total wealth of the family unit. A quiet confidence resides in the simple fact of sufficiency. The coals are now almost entirely hidden beneath a fine layer of gray ash. They offer only a weak, dull amber. Watching the shapes of the sleeping forms, they provide residual warmth, a gentle, tender memory of the flame's high, passionate dance. The air near the floor remains cooler, demanding the security of the thick, woven wool blankets. The fabric is rough wool, scratchy, but deeply warm, secured with a heavy bronze pin near the shoulder. This is the simple, enduring luxury of being dry and contained within the protective dark. Smooth wooden bowls placed neatly near the large water skin are permanently darkened by countless washings and the fat residue of meals past. They possess a satiny patina, a velvet sheen achieved only through relentless handling and cleaning over decades. Piece of wood, each smooth surface speaks only of endless domestic routine. The small weight of these objects is the manageable weight of daily time itself slowly. Surely the few small domestic sounds cease their gentle scraping only. The collective slow rhythmic breathing remains the deep soft sound of shared survival. Echoing lightly in the circular space, the village sleeps a profound, deep ancient sleep beneath the silent rotation of the distant stars. The silence is broken only by the settling sound of the heavy thatched roof adjusting to the slow drop in night. Temperature, very small creak. a soft sigh of straw and structural timbers, accommodating the chill. This sound is so familiar, it's entirely absorbed into the texture of the sleep. It's not an interruption, it is of the comforting. Architecture. Of the silence, the bundles of winter firewood are stacked precisely just inside the low doorway. Bark still holds the clean smell of the oak forest where they were felled. They represent the calculated provision for the future, the slow burn. Against the coming cold, every chore is forward, looking every repetition ensures survival through the seasonal cycle. Concept of hurry is foreign to this rhythm. Actions are slow, deliberate, mindful of the necessary repetition they will undergo. Tomorrow and the day after that, the movement of time is measured by the slow accumulation of ash. In the heart